Chapter 2272. This glazed pagoda did not only contain the power of Jiuyu alone. The 8 battle saints, the crescent moon Shakyamuni, the old man with white hair, and the experts of the 7 sects all poured their power into the glazed pagoda at this moment. Suddenly, the glazed pagoda pressed down on Chu Fengmian. Immortal! Chu Fengmian's face was extremely solemn. The power of the immortal true body in his body was pushed to the extreme. In an instant, the supreme sword qi that flew out all returned to Chu Fengmian's side, protecting him for a moment. Feudal struggle. Qian Yun sneered, looking at Chu Fengmian. In an instant, he activated the glazed pagoda and pressed down on Chu Fengmian's body. The layers of defense on Chu Fengmian's body were shattered by the glazed pagoda. Roar! The dragon roar and the beast roared. Behind Chu Fengmian, the black whale, the ancestral heavenly dragon, and the heaven-devouring beast, the 3 innate divine beasts, suddenly burst out and soared into the sky, charging straight at the descending glazed pagoda. The moment the 3 great innate divine beasts rushed into the sky, they actually faintly resisted the glazed pagoda that was pressing down on Chu Fengmian, preventing the glazed pagoda from going any further. What a powerful bloodline power! Qian Yun, the 8 battle saints, and the others' faces were extremely cold. Chu Fengmian was now at the end of his life, but he was still able to resist the joint suppression of the experts of the 7 sects with his bloodline power. This was the best opportunity to suppress Chu Fengmian. This time they had forced Chu Fengmian into such a state, and they had suffered heavy losses. The desolate ancient pearl of the old man with white hair, the 4 incarnations of the 8 battle saints, and the second real body of the old poison master. After paying such a heavy price, they would certainly not let Chu Fengmian break free and recover his strength today. Saint Monarch True Sovereign! All of a sudden, Qian Yun let out a long roar. His essence blood within his body suddenly started to burn. The burning essence blood turned into an incomparably pure energy and poured into the glazed pagoda. The power of the glazed pagoda was suddenly pushed to the extreme. It vaguely suppressed the 3 innate divine beasts on Chu Fengmian's body. Ancient Human Emperor, enlighten the world! Halberd of the Human Emperor! Suddenly, Chu Fengmian roared and an ancient earthen jar appeared in his palm. Chu Fengmian wielded the human ruler's halberd and swung it out. The power of the human emperor's halberd swept through everything and bombarded the glazed pagoda. The glazed pagoda trembled. It was on the verge of shattering the pagoda. What is this? Extreme immortal weapon? Emperor Jar? Chu Fengmian, Yun suddenly Xianis. Chu Fengmian had used the Emperor Jar during the 9 regions genius competition. They also knew that Chu Fengmian had a broken Emperor weapon in his hand. However, the Emperor Jar back then was far less powerful than it was now. Being able to transform into the halberd of the human emperor meant that the jar had recovered a lot of its power. Even the glazed pagoda almost couldn't withstand the power of the halberd of the human emperor. As expected of the emperor weapon, old poison master couldn't help but sigh when he saw the power of the halberd of the human emperor. They had also heard of the legend of the Emperor Jar. Now that Chu Fengmian had condensed the halberd of the human emperor and not the sword of the human emperor, it meant that the Emperor Jar was still in an incomplete state. Even an incomplete Emperor Jar had such heaven-defying power. He couldn't imagine the power of a complete Emperor Jar. An extreme immortal weapon was the king of immortal weapons, the emperor of immortal weapons. It was equivalent to an immortal emperor among immortals. Even some immortal emperors might not be able to control an extreme immortal weapon. Whoever obtained such an extreme immortal weapon would become an invincible existence in the same realm. The Emperor Jar, I want it! Suddenly, the moment the Emperor Jar appeared, the space above Chu Fengmian's head was torn apart. A crimson figure stepped out. The crimson figure held a giant sword and suddenly slashed at Chu Fengmian. Raging Flame Sword Emperor. The appearance of this figure caused many people to exclaim in surprise. This was another great figure, Raging Flame Sword Emperor, one of the 5 sword masters of the Tianjian sect. Raging Flame Sword Emperor had been famous for even longer than Ing Qianzhua, the Phantom Sword Master. He was an out-and-out antique of the Tianjian sect, one of the 5 sword masters. His strength was extremely terrifying. His aura had reached the limit of the Immortal King realm. He was only 1 step away from the 6th level of the 9 immortal realms. The Immortal Monarch realm was extremely terrifying. Many people didn't expect that this antique had been hiding in the void all this time. Even when Ing Qianzhua was killed by Chu Fengmian, Raging Flame Sword Emperor didn't make a move. He had been waiting for an opportunity to kill Chu Fengmian with a single strike. Now the opportunity had finally arrived. Moreover, this time, Raging Flame Sword Emperor didn't only want to kill Chu Fengmian. He also wanted to seize the Emperor Jar in Chu Fengmian's hands. The giant sword slashed down, and the scorching waves of fire almost roasted Chu Fengmian alive. The scorching waves of fire were just a prelude. After that, the real terrifying power came. The sword slashed down, containing the power to split mountains and shatter seas. The sea-shattering divine sword. The highest quality immortal sword in the Tianjian sect. The power of the sea-shattering divine sword is said to be close to the power of an immortal weapon of extreme Tao. Looking at the giant sword in Raging Flame Sword Emperor's hand, many people were shocked. They could clearly feel the power of the sea-shattering divine sword. A sword to shatter the sea. The name of the sea-shattering divine sword wasn't an exaggeration. The moment it slashed down, Chu Fengmian felt that his body, along with the surrounding space, was being suppressed and torn to shreds. Damn it! Chu Fengmian's face was extremely cold. A jade talisman suddenly appeared in his hand. This jade talisman was the jade talisman of the ancient desolation White Wolf. It had inherited the power of the ancient desolation White Wolf's incarnation. Chu Fengmian didn't want to use this jade talisman at this time, but he didn't expect that he would be forced into such a dangerous situation. In order to deal with Chu Fengmian, the 7 sects had used all their trump cards. Even an existence like Raging Flame Sword Emperor had suddenly made a move. Moreover, he had concealed his strength so deeply. Calm. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2273. This glazed pagoda did not only contain the power of Qian Yun alone. The 8 battle saints, the crescent moon Shakyamuni, the old man with white hair, and the experts of the 7 sects all poured their power into the glazed pagoda at this moment. Suddenly, the glazed pagoda pressed down on Chu Fengmian. Immortal! Chu Fengmian's face was extremely solemn. The power of the immortal true body in his body was pushed to the extreme. In an instant, the supreme sword qi that flew out all returned to Chu Fengmian's side, protecting him for a moment. Feudal struggle. Qian Yun sneered, looking at Chu Fengmian. In an instant, he activated the glazed pagoda and pressed down on Chu Fengmian's body. The layers of defense on Chu Fengmian's body were shattered by the glazed pagoda. Roar! The dragon roar and the beast roared. Behind Chu Fengmian, the black whale, ancestor Tianlong, and the heaven-devouring beast, the 3 great innate divine beasts phantoms suddenly burst out and rushed towards the glazed pagoda that was descending. The moment the 3 great innate divine beasts phantoms rushed into the sky, they actually faintly resisted the glazed pagoda that was pressing down on Chu Fengmian, preventing the glazed pagoda from moving any further. What a powerful bloodline power! Qian Yun, the 8 battle saints, and the others' faces were extremely cold. Chu Fengmian was now at the end of his life, but he was still able to resist the joint suppression of the experts of the 7 sects with the power of his bloodline. This was the best opportunity to suppress Chu Fengmian. This time, they had forced Chu Fengmian into such a state, and they had suffered heavy losses. The desolate ancient pearl of the old man with white hair, the 4 incarnations of the 8 battle saints, and the second real body of the old poison master. After paying such a heavy price, they would certainly not let Chu Fengmian break free and recover his strength today. Saint King True Sovereign! All of a sudden, Qian Yun let out a long roar. His essence blood within his body started to burn at this moment. The burning essence blood turned into an incomparably pure energy and poured into the glazed pagoda. The power of the lapis lazuli pagoda was pushed to the extreme. Vaguely, it was about to overpower the three connate divine beasts on Chu Fengmian's body. The ancient human emperor enlightened the world. Human emperor's halberd. Suddenly, Chu Fengmian roared and an ancient earthen jar appeared in his palm. Chu Fengmian wielded the human ruler's halberd and swung it out. The power of the human emperor's halberd swept through everything and bombarded the glazed pagoda. The glazed pagoda trembled and was on the verge of shattering under this attack. This is an extreme immortal weapon, the human emperor jar? Seeing the human emperor halberd in Chu Fengmian's hand, Qian Yun suddenly shouted. Previously, Chu Fengmian had used the human emperor jar during the 9 regions genius competition. They also knew that Chu Fengmian had a broken human emperor's weapon. However, at that time, the jar's power was far from what it was now. Being able to transform into the human emperor's halberd meant that the jar had recovered a lot of its power. When the human emperor's halberd swept down, even the glazed pagoda almost couldn't withstand the force of the attack. As expected of a human emperor's weapon, the old poison master couldn't help but sigh when he saw the mighty power of the human emperor's halberd. They had also heard of the legends of the human emperor's jar. Now that Chu Fengmian had condensed the human emperor's halberd and not the final human emperor's sword, it meant that the jar was still in an incomplete state. Even an incomplete jar had such heaven-defying power. He couldn't even imagine the power of the complete emperor jar. An extreme immortal weapon was the king of immortal weapons, the emperor of immortal weapons. It was equivalent to an immortal emperor among immortals. Even some immortal emperors might not be able to control an extreme immortal weapon. Whoever obtained such an extreme immortal weapon would become an invincible existence in the same realm. The human emperor's jar, I want it. Suddenly, the moment the jar appeared, the space above Chu Fengmian's head was torn apart. A crimson figure stepped out of it. This crimson figure held a giant sword in his hand and suddenly slashed at Chu Fengmian. Raging Flame Sword Emperor. The appearance of this figure caused many people to exclaim in surprise. This was another big shot. He was one of the 5 sword lords of the Tianjian sect, Raging Flame Sword Emperor. Even when Ying Qianzuo was killed by Chu Fengmian, Raging Flame Sword Emperor didn't make a move. Instead, he waited until Chu Fengmian was at the end of his rope before suddenly making a move. Obviously, he planned to kill Chu Fengmian as soon as he made a move. He wanted to kill Chu Fengmian with a thunderous momentum, not giving him any chance to escape. This disrupted Chu Fengmian's plan. He had to use the Jade Talisman in advance. Chu Fengmian gathered spiritual energy in his palm and was about to inject it into the Jade Talisman. Suddenly, a sword light fell from the sky. This sword light was like a river of stars. Its target wasn't Chu Fengmian, but Raging Flame Sword Emperor, who was above Chu Fengmian. Who is it? Raging Flame Sword Emperor didn't expect that someone would suddenly attack him at this time. For a moment, he was unprepared and was forced back by this sword. The sword light that he slashed at Chu Fengmian was also shattered. Where did this sword light come from? This sword light contains the power of stars. It seems to be a secret technique of Dubhe Hall. Why would someone from Dubhe Hall suddenly help this kid? Raging Flame Sword Emperor was not the only one who was puzzled. Even the other experts present were puzzled. Countless people were looking for the shadow of this sword light. Suddenly, they noticed that a figure had appeared beside Chu Fengmian. It was a woman. She wore a purple robe and looked magnificent. As she stood there, the stars in the sky seemed to gather on her body. She was the center of the stars. Dubhe art. Many people were shocked when they saw the stars gathering around the woman. Only those who had mastered the Tianshu method were qualified to see such a scene. The Dubhe art was the foundation of Heaven Palace's cultivation technique. Chu Fengmian didn't want to use this jade talisman at this time, but he didn't expect that he would be forced into such a dangerous situation. In order to deal with Chu Fengmian, the 7 great sects had used all their trump cards. Even an existence like Raging Flame Sword Emperor had suddenly made a move. Moreover, he had concealed his strength so deeply. Obviously, he planned to kill Chu Fengmian once and for all, not giving him any chance to escape. Calm. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2274. You're here. Chu Fengmian looked at Alcade Star Emperor in front of him with nostalgia in his eyes, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. I didn't expect you to see me in such a sorry state. I also didn't expect you to still be alive. Alcade Star Emperor turned to Chu Fengmian, and her face was as tender as water. This expression made the experts of Dubhe Palace change their faces in shock. Before Alcade Star Emperor betrayed Dubhe Hall, many of them had seen Alcade Star Emperor. At that time, Alcade Star Emperor's face was cold all year round. In Dubhe Hall, no one dared to approach her, let alone talk to her. They had never thought that Alcade Star Emperor would be so gentle to a person. Who the hell is this kid? Many experts of Dubhe Palace went crazy with jealousy when they saw this scene. Alcade Star Emperor was not only the #1 genius of Dubhe Palace since ancient times, but also the #1 beauty of Dubhe Palace. 10,000 years ago, countless geniuses and experts fell for her. Among the experts of Dubhe Palace, many admired and longed for Alcade Star Emperor. They couldn't even get a word from Alcade Star Emperor. But now, Alcade Star Emperor was unfrozen to Chu Fengmian, and her face was full of tenderness. The moment she saw Chu Fengmian, a knot in her heart seemed to be untied. This time, no one can touch you in front of me, Alcade Star Emperor said softly, and suddenly turned her head, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. The 8 war saints, Qian Yuan, the old poison master, Crescent Moon Shakyamuni, and others all shuddered when Alcade Star Emperor's eyes swept across them. They all clearly saw the killing intent in Alcade Star Emperor's eyes. Even they, who were also immortal kings, couldn't bear this kind of cold killing intent. None of them wanted to be enemies with Alcade Star Emperor. But today they finally forced Chu Fengmian into a desperate situation, so they couldn't give up the best opportunity to suppress Chu Fengmian. Alcade Star Emperor, do you really want to protect this person and be enemies with us? Qian Yuan looked at Alcade Star Emperor and suddenly said, even if you are Alcade Star Emperor, you can't be our opponent today. Why do you have to do this alone? In front of me, no one can touch a single hair of his. Alcade Star Emperor snorted coldly upon hearing Qian Yuan's words. If you want to fight, then fight. If you don't, then scram. Yao Guang, it's best if you don't interfere in this matter. The Mizar Hall Master from the Sky Pivot Hall slowly opened his mouth and said. He looked at Alcade Star Emperor with a complicated gaze. Ever since Alcade Star Emperor had left Dubhe Hall, even the experts of Dubhe Hall could not find him. Today, Alcade Star Emperor had appeared for Chu Fengmian, which made him a little jealous. Don't interfere? What can I do if I insist on interfering today? Alcade Star Emperor looked at Mizar Palace Master and said with a cold smile. I've regretted it once. I won't regret it a second time. When everyone heard this, they were all confused. Only Mizar Palace Master was clear in his heart. In the battle of besieging the Sword Dao sect, in order to prevent Alcade Star Emperor from rescuing him, he tricked Alcade Star Emperor into a forbidden area of Dubhe Hall in advance and completely sealed her inside. Alcade Star Emperor only broke out when the Sword Dao sect was destroyed. What she saw was the ruins of the Sword Dao sect and the news of Chu Fengmian's death. After this incident, The Alcade Star Monarch had completely parted ways with the Sky Pivot Palace. This is the decision of Lord Star Emperor. This kid must die today. This is not something you can change. Mizar Palace Master stared at Alcade Star Emperor and said coldly, Star Emperor. The moment he heard this name, Alcade Star Emperor's eyes flashed with a strange light. Star Emperor, the oldest ancestor of Dubhi Hall, was also Alcade Star Emperor's nominal father. Although Alcade Star Emperor was born in a branch family, she was raised as Star Emperor's daughter since she was young. For her, Star Emperor was her real father. I have already repaid what I owed Dubhi Hall. Since I left Dubhi Hall, I have no relationship with Dubhi Hall. Even if Star Emperor comes in person, I will not leave. Alcade Star Emperor's eyes flashed with a bit of firmness. Mizar, you take the people of Dubhi Hall and leave now. I can pretend that I have never seen you. Otherwise, I will kill you later. These words contained a cold killing intent. Mizar Palace Master could hear that the killing intent was real. If he continued to stay here, Alcade Star Emperor would really kill him regardless of their relationship. His expression was a little hesitant. Mizar Palace Master, don't be afraid. This time, our 7 sects have joined forces. How can he defy the heavens with his strength alone? The old Poison Master suddenly said coldly from the side. Alcade Star Emperor, today, our 7 sects have joined forces. Do you plan to contend against the entire 7 sects with your strength alone? 8 Battle Saints also snorted coldly. A mayfly trying to shake a tree. You overestimate yourself. So what if I can contend against the 7 sects? If he can, so can I. Alcade Star Emperor stood beside Chu Fengmian and said coldly. The knot in her heart was that she did not stand beside Chu Fengmian when the Sword Dao sect was destroyed 10,000 years ago. This time, she managed to do it. To do all this, she was not afraid of death. Alcade Star Emperor is going to risk her life. It's too terrifying. How can this kid make Alcade Star Emperor risk her life for him? Many onlookers saw Alcade Star Emperor's actions and were about to go crazy with jealousy. Love tribulation, love tribulation. On the side of Dubhi Hall, in the galaxy formed by the secret technique, an old man sighed. After glancing at Alcade Star Emperor a few times, he turned around and left, withdrawing from the secret technique. Alcade Star Emperor was almost watched by the older generation of experts of Dubhi Hall. They were not willing to fight with Alcade Star Emperor at this time. You don't have to do this. You don't owe me anything. Chu Fengmian looked at Alcade Star Emperor and sighed. He had fallen in his previous life, but he had never blamed Alcade Star Emperor. Although her identity was noble, she did not represent the entire Dubhi Hall. The decision of Dubhi Hall was not something she could change. It's not a debt. It's just my wish. Alcade Star Emperor looked at Chu Fengmian with tenderness in her eyes. Chu Fengmian did not speak again. He just looked at Alcade Star Emperor. His eyes contained everything. There was no need to explain the relationship between the two. A look was enough. Suddenly, Chu Fengmian laughed. You're here today. You can kill them all together with me to pay tribute to my master. Chu Fengmian looked at the crowd with boundless killing intent in his eyes. Chapter 2275. Boy, do you really think you can get away with the help of Alcade Star Emperor? Raging Flame Sword Emperor sneered when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. He looked at Alcade Star Emperor and said, Alcade Star Emperor, even if you intervene today, you won't be able to change anything. If you retreat now, you can still protect yourself. If you insist on being with this brat, you will be buried together with him today. Raging Flame Sword Emperor's tone contained killing intent. That's right, Alcade Star Emperor. You can't stop us alone. Leaving now is the best choice. Qian Yuan and the 8 Battle Saints also stepped out. Their eyes revealed some fighting spirit as they shouted in unison. Today they had paid such a great price and finally forced Chu Fengmian into a desperate situation. At this time, no matter who came, they would not let Chu Fengmian go. Then let's see. Alcade's Star Emperor said with a disdainful smile when he heard the threats. He looked at Qian Yuan and the 8 battle saints. Make your move. With just the 2 of you, I can kill you in 3 moves. As soon as this sentence came out, the faces of the surrounding warriors changed slightly. Alcade's Star Emperor's words were arrogant to the extreme. However, no one dared to doubt Alcade's Star Emperor's words. Even though Alcade's Star Emperor had not fought for thousands of years, everyone still remembered her talent in the past. Qian Yuan and the 8 battle saints' faces turned ugly when they heard this. They looked at the 2 of them and did not dare to take a step forward. Humph, Alcade's Star Emperor, others may be afraid of you, but I am not. I want to see what kind of strength the number 1 genius of Dubhe Palace has. Suddenly, a cold snort sounded. Raging Flame Sword Emperor sneered, took a step forward, and slashed at Alcade's Star Emperor with his sword. Among the people present, only Raging Flame Sword Emperor was not afraid of Alcade's Star Emperor. Raging Flame Sword Emperor was the number 1 sword master of the Tianjian sect. He was a real invincible old ancestor whose strength had reached the peak of the Immortal King realm. Even if Alcade's Star Emperor was an invincible existence in the same realm, he was not afraid. The giant sword in Sword Emperor Raging Flame's hand suddenly slashed down. The power of the slash shook the heavens and the earth. The surrounding space was trembling and had the power to shatter the void. However, the Alcade's Star Emperor was not afraid at all in the face of this power. She moved her palm, and a stream of star power gathered in her hand. Suddenly, it turned into a long sword, and there were shadows of stars in the long sword. As the sword slashed out, it was as if a river of stars had filled the air. A casual swing of her sword was comparable to the most powerful secret skill in Dubhe Hall. Great success in the heavenly pivot Dharma. Seeing the might of Alcade's Star Emperor's sword, everyone was incomparably amazed in their hearts. Once the great accomplishment Heavenly Pivot Law was achieved, one would be able to control the stars, and oneself would be the center of the stars. Ordinary Tao of celestial phenomenon relied more or less on the power of the stars. However, the greater mastery Dubhe art required one to become the center of the stars and control the power of the stars. The power of the 2 was completely different. In the starry sky outside the domain, there were countless stars, and each star contained enormous power. Now, the power of the stars in the sky of the 9 domains was all supporting Alcade's Star Emperor. She slashed out with her sword, and the power of the stars circulated, turning into a river of sword chi that soared into the sky. The sword edge of Sword Emperor Raging Flame was shattered by the river of sword chi. However, Sword Emperor Raging Flame was not an ordinary figure. He slashed out with his sword again, and the sword light swept through the heavens and the earth. It entered the river of sword chi and burned the power of the river of sword chi. The 2 of them exchanged blows in the void. In an instant they had clashed dozens of times. Any one of these collisions was enough to kill an ordinary immortal king. The strength of the 2 of them was not something that ordinary immortal kings could interfere with. The 8 war saints, Qian Yun, and the others wanted to lend Sword Emperor Raging Flame a hand, but they could only give up on this idea after sensing the terrifying power. In the blink of an eye, their eyes fell on Chu Fengmian. Boy, without Alcade's Star Emperor to help you this time, I would like to see what other tricks you have. Qian Yun suddenly moved. A glazed pagoda condensed in his palm again, and it pressed down on Chu Fengmian with a loud rumble. Not only him, but the 8 war saints, the old poison master, the old man with white hair, the crescent moon Shakyamuni, and the Mizar Palace master also attacked together after hesitating for a while. The 6 immortal kings suddenly struck out at this moment, launching attacks at Chu Fengmian. You're courting death. When the 6 of them attacked, Alcade's Star Emperor, who was fighting with Sword Emperor Raging Flame in the sky, had a flash of anger in his eyes. Just as he was about to attack and kill the 8 war saints and the others, a sword light suddenly slashed towards him. "Alcade Star Emperor, your opponent is me," Sword Emperor Raging Flame sneered. Of course, he would not let Alcade Star Emperor stop the 8 war saints and the others. He took the initiative to attack not because he wanted to kill Alcade Star Emperor. Their target today was only Chu Fengmian. As for Alcade Star Emperor, it would be fine as long as he could delay him. He delayed Alcade Star Emperor, and the remaining 8 war saints and 6 immortal kings attacked together. It was very easy for them to suppress Chu Fengmian. "Don't worry, I will deal with these people." Chu Fengmian felt Alcade Star Emperor's anxiety and suddenly transmitted a message to her. Although Alcade Star Emperor didn't know what kind of trump card Chu Fengmian had, she believed in Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian wasn't a person who was blindly arrogant. Alcade Star Emperor simply ignored Chu Fengmian and focused on dealing with Raging Flame Sword Emperor. Alcade Star Emperor was delayed by Sword Emperor Raging Flame in the sky. The 8 war saints, Qianyun, and the others sneered as they stared at Chu Fengmian like a dead man. The glazed pagoda, supported by the power of the 6 people, suddenly pressed down on Chu Fengmian. In an instant, Chu Fengmian felt as if the power of a world was pressing down on his body. The power of the 6 immortal kings could easily shatter a star. They definitely had the power to suppress a world. "Boy, without Alcade Star Emperor, I would like to see how you are going to contend against us." The 8 war saints stared at Chu Fengmian and smiled ferociously. His 4 avatars had died in Chu Fengmian's hands. He had never suffered such a loss since he became famous. He was prepared to torture Chu Fengmian after he was subdued and revealed all his secret. Only then could he resolve the hatred in his heart. Tianlong change. Chu Fengmian's expression did not change. Looking at the glazed pagoda pressing down on him, his body suddenly flashed and disappeared in front of everyone. Chapter 2276. Trying to escape? Seeing Chu Fengmian's figure suddenly disappear, the 8 battle saints, Qianyun, and the others snorted coldly. Suddenly, they followed closely behind and chased after Chu Fengmian. The immortal kings present had reached a very deep level of understanding of the Space Tao. The moment Chu Fengmian's figure disappeared, they all discovered the direction Chu Fengmian left in and immediately chased after him. The 8 battle saints, Qianyun, the old poison master, Crescent Moon Shakyamuni, the white-haired old man, and the Mizar Palace master. The 6 immortal kings almost instantly surrounded Chu Fengmian from all directions. "Kid, let's see where you can escape to when the time comes." The 8 battle saints stared at Chu Fengmian and said coldly, "Escape? Who said I'm going to escape?" At this moment, Chu Fengmian's face suddenly revealed a confident smile. He felt the fluctuation of the space around him and muttered to himself, "It's finally time." Seeing the smile on Chu Fengmian's face, the 8 battle saints, Qianyun, and the others all showed some uneasiness. They looked at Chu Fengmian with fear. "Don't listen to this kid's tricks." The old poison master snorted coldly. "Let's go together and suppress this person first." "All right." Hearing the old poison master's words, the 8 battle saints, Qianyun and the others, who were originally a little fearful, no longer hesitated and suddenly attacked together. In an instant, the power of the 6 of them gathered together and poured into the glazed pagoda in Qianyun's hand, suppressing Chu Fengmian. Seeing the glazed pagoda suppressing him, Chu Fengmian's expression was incomparably relaxed. Suddenly, he crushed a jade talisman in his hand. Roar! The moment the jade talisman was crushed, a bestial roar resounded through the heavens and earth. This bestial roar shocked the old poison master, the 8 battle saints, Qianyun, and the other immortal kings. Their faces changed greatly. In front of Chu Fengmian, a huge figure that was thousands of feet tall suddenly appeared. The moment this figure appeared, it suddenly clawed at the glazed pagoda. The glazed pagoda that was formed by 6 immortal kings was suddenly shattered by this claw. This gigantic figure was none other than the ancient desolate white wolf. At the same time, an ancient bronze door suddenly appeared behind Chu Fengmian. Behind this ancient bronze door was a world. Sword domain. This ancient bronze door was the entrance to the sword domain. The sword realm was constantly changing its position in the void. Chu Fengmian had been waiting for the moment when the sword realm was about to reach him. Now, the sword realm had finally arrived behind Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian immediately activated the power of the Sword Emperor Crown and opened the door to the sword domain. In an instant, the surrounding space was the void was to the sword. What is this thing? Sword 2. This is the entrance to Sword Gate. The small world. They were they to could not? Their eyes and their eyes were, their eyes, there. Were to they Yun and the times, they were, they and the others were, and them and the faces of them. They were there them. Ancient? Question mark. Ancient desolation white wolf. The Mizar Palace Master and the white-haired elder were terrified when they saw the ancient desolation white wolf. The ancient desolation white wolf was a famous ferocious beast. The incarnation of the ancient desolation white wolf was much stronger than 10% of the ancient desolation white wolf's power. When Chu Fengmian opened the entrance to the sword domain and pulled the surrounding space into the sword domain, the incarnation of the ancient desolation white wolf was vaguely connected to his original body on the Jade Desolation Star. A steady stream of power was sent from the original body of the ancient desolation white wolf to the incarnation. The power of the incarnation of the ancient desolation white wolf had reached the immortal monarch realm. Chu Fengmian had been holding the jade talisman formed by the incarnation of the ancient desolation white wolf. He had been waiting for this moment. If the ancient desolation white wolf was at the pinnacle of the immortal king realm, no matter how powerful it would not be able to defeat the 6 immortal kings. However, the power of the incarnation of the ancient desolation white wolf had reached the immortal monarch realm. It was completely different from before. In front of an immortal monarch, a mere immortal king was not worth mentioning. Kill them! Chu Fengmian shouted coldly. The incarnation of the ancient desolation white wolf immediately took action. Its speed was extremely fast, and in an instant, it rushed toward Qian Yun and the other 6 battle saints. Damn it, we were tricked! Qian Yun and the others immediately changed their expressions and shouted in shock. Let's go! Qian Yun and the others immediately pushed their power to the extreme, bursting out with escape light, and fled fiercely outside. With their experience, they naturally knew that Chu Fengmian had deliberately lured them in. Chu Fengmian had been holding the jade talisman of the ancient desolation white wolf incarnation, but he had not used a single one. He had been waiting for this moment to capture all of them in one fell swoop. If Chu Fengmian had used the jade talisman of the ancient desolation white wolf before, at most, he would have been able to force them to retreat, but he would not be able to eliminate them completely. However, after opening the entrance to the sword domain, the power of the ancient desolation white wolf had skyrocketed. Today, none of the 6 people would be able to leave alive. The essence blood of each immortal king expert represented the inscription of the immortal real body. Chu Fengmian did not intend to let any of them go. Escape? Once you enter the sword domain, there is no need to escape. Sword domain entrance, seal it. The sword emperor crown suddenly appeared on top of Chu Fengmian's head. The moment the sword emperor crown was on top of Chu Fengmian's head, he felt that the entire sword domain was now under Chu Fengmian's control. Chu Fengmian pointed his palm. The surrounding space was completely sealed. Streaks of sword qi soared into the sky, turning into a cage. The 8 battle saints, Qian Yun, and the other's escape light had just approached the edge of the cage when they were forced back by the sword chi within. Although the restrictive array of the upper sword sect had experienced tens of millions of years and had lost a lot of power, it was still not something that immortal kings could shake. The surrounding space had been pulled into the sword domain entrance by Chu Fengmian. Now it was considered within the sword domain's boundary. Although it was only the edge, Chu Fengmian could not mobilize the power of the restrictive array within the sword domain. However, it was only a part of it. The power of the sword domain entrance alone was enough for Chu Fengmian. With the sword domain entrance completely sealed off the surrounding space, Qian Yun, the 8 battle saints, and the Mizar Palace Master were all trapped within. Now they could not escape even if they wanted to. Chu Fengmian had schemed for so long to capture them all in one fell swoop. Ancestor of all poisons. Sage King Real Body. Star Annihilation. On the other side, the Mizar Palace Master, the Old Poison Master, and the others immediately gathered their power and attacked the ancient Desolation White Wolf when they realized that they could not escape. Chapter 2277. Roar! The ancient Emperor White Wolf roared. Facing the bombardment of countless immortal techniques, it lifted its sharp claws and swept them down. All the immortal techniques were shattered by the power of the ancient Emperor White Wolf. The combined power of the 6 immortal kings was far from being a match for the ancient Emperor White Wolf. Qian Yun, the 8 battle saints, and the white-haired old man were sent flying by the aftermath of the power. They spat out large amounts of blood from their mouth. The 3 of them had suffered some injuries during the battle with Chu Fengmian. Now that they were fighting with the ancient Desolation White Wolf, their injuries suddenly flared up and their faces turned pale. At this moment, Chu Fengmian's figure suddenly appeared beside the 3 of them like a ghost. Die! Chu Fengmian smiled malevolently and slashed down with the sword in his hand. Qian Yun, the 8 battle saints, and the white-haired old man, the 3 immortal kings, were shattered by Chu Fengmian's sword. Their essence blood was swallowed by Chu Fengmian's sword edge. Although Chu Fengmian had already killed 4 of the 8 battle saints' incarnations, there were still 4 of them, including their original bodies. These 4 figures were also killed by Chu Fengmian's sword. For a moment, a steady stream of essence blood poured into Chu Fengmian's body. As the essence blood poured into Chu Fengmian's immortal real body, the missing part of the second inscription was instantly filled. In a moment, the second inscription was condensed. When the second inscription was condensed, Chu Fengmian's power reached a new height. Moreover, the essence blood of the 3 wasn't enough to condense the second inscription. When all the essence blood was devoured by the immortal real body, Chu Fengmian sensed that a new pattern was condensing. This was the third inscription. With so much essence blood, the embryonic form of the third inscription of the immortal real body was slowly being born. This inscription can still be condensed. Chu Fengmian was overjoyed when he saw the embryonic form of the third inscription. He thought that condensing 1 or 2 inscriptions would be the limit given how heaven-defying the inscription was. He didn't expect that he could condense the third one. However, for the current Chu Fengmian, the more inscriptions he could condense, the more advantageous it would be for him. The 4th level of the immortal real body allowed him to condense inscriptions, which made up for his lack of strength. Chu Fengmian was his limit to fight an immortal general as a half-step celestial being. Was only able to fight against an immortal marquis because Chu Fengmian immortal marquis swordsmanship sect, he had obtained a large amount of swordsmanship. Against an immortal king, Chu Fengmian could only rely on the inscription of the 4th level of the immortal true body. The more inscriptions he could condense, the more Chu Fengmian's strength would be enhanced. After Chu Fengmian swallowed the essence blood of the 3, he felt the changes in his immortal body. He lifted his gaze and looked at the remaining Poison Master, Crescent Moon Discipline King, and Mizar Hall Leader. The 3 of them had not been injured before, so they were still able to contend against the ancient Desolation White Wolf. However, if they were to contend against it, they would only be able to barely hold it off. The ancient Desolation White Wolf could have easily killed them. They were still alive because the ancient Desolation White Wolf was toying with them. Don't waste time. Your incarnation can only last for 2 hours. I have other things to do. Chu Fengmian looked at the ancient Desolation White Wolf and said. The ancient Desolation White Wolf incarnation was Chu Fengmian's greatest trump card from Shang Sword Sect. He didn't want to use it so hastily, but he was besieged as soon as he left Shang Sword Sect. Chu Fengmian had no other choice but to use the ancient Desolation White Wolf incarnation. Since he had to use the ancient Desolation White Wolf incarnation, Chu Fengmian naturally had to make good use of the 2 hours. Chu Fengmian's eyes were filled with coldness. The 7 sects had already known Chu Fengmian's true identity and had already shed all pretense of cordiality. Chu Fengmian wouldn't be Chu Fengmian if he didn't take revenge now that they dared to besiege him. Previously, Chu Fengmian still had the idea of hiding his strength and avoiding the 7 sections. After all, the 9 regions were in turmoil and the 7 sects wouldn't pay attention to a junior like Chu Fengmian. However, since Chu Fengmian obtained the inheritance of the Shang Sword Sect, he was no longer a faintly discernible junior. This time, the 7 major sects called out many old antiques who were in seclusion to deal with Chu Fengmian. Since he couldn't hide, there was no need for him to hide. The ancient Desolation White Wolf incarnation wasn't inferior to Raging Flame Sword Emperor even when it was out of the sword domain. At this level, Chu Fengmian could do a lot of things in 2 hours. Chu Fengmian wasn't willing to waste his time on these dead people. Yes. The ancient Desolation White Wolf didn't hold back after hearing Chu Fengmian's words. Its sharp claws fiercely smashed down. The explosive power was completely different from before. In an instant, the old Poison Master, Mizar Hall Master, and Crescent Moon Shakyamuni were sent flying. Their bodies were dripping with blood. They were seriously injured by this attack. Chu Fengmian's figure flickered as he rushed over. The 3 injured people were no longer Chu Fengmian's opponent. As Chu Fengmian's sword flashed, the 3 figures also disappeared under Chu Fengmian's sword. Their blood essence was also devoured by the sky-devouring secret technique and poured into Chu Fengmian's body. In an instant, the 3rd embryonic form began to condense and gradually solidify. It was only when it was condensed to the extent of 2/3 that the power of the blood essence was completely devoured. It's still lacking a little. The amount of blood essence needed to condense the 3rd inscription is also a little more than the 2nd inscription. Chu Fengmian thought in his heart when he saw the changes. The power of the inscription was terrifying, but it was also incomparably difficult to condense it. Although Chu Fengmian didn't know how many inscriptions could be condensed at the most, if it continued to develop, even if the inscription could be condensed endlessly, it would consume more blood essence, and Chu Fengmian wouldn't be able to accumulate it. This time, Chu Fengmian could obtain a large amount of blood essence, which was enough to slaughter more than half of the experts of the 7 major sections. The remaining experts of the 7 major sects wouldn't be much more than the experts that were used in this battle. Condensing the inscription required the blood essence of experts above the immortal Marquis realm. As for the martial artists and demon gods below the immortal Marquis realm, their blood essence couldn't be used to condense the inscription. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2278. Immortal Marquis experts were the peak experts of some of the major forces in the 9 domains. For example, the strongest expert of the 100 Territories Alliance was only an immortal Marquis. If Chu Fengmian wanted to kill a large number of immortal Marquis and immortal kings, he wouldn't get much blood essence even if he slaughtered all the experts in the 9 domains. It's still impossible to condense a large number of inscriptions to improve my strength. Chu Fengmian understood that the best way to improve his strength was to go to the 3 sacred domains or celestial 9 domains, draw upon the power of heaven and earth, pass the Deva tribulation, and step into the celestial realm. Condensing inscriptions could also improve his strength, but it required a large number of inscriptions, and Chu Fengmian couldn't gather enough blood essence to condense these inscriptions. In the extraterritorial starry sky, an immortal general dominated a star domain, and experts above the immortal marquis level were even rarer. Soon, Chu Fengmian dispelled the idea of condensing a large number of inscriptions to improve his strength. For Chu Fengmian, the most important thing to quickly improve his strength was to break through the realm. With his current accumulation, once he passed the Deva tribulation, he might not be stuck in the celestial realm. It was very likely that he would step out of the profound heaven realm. It's time to leave after dealing with the 7 sects. Chu Fengmian's eyes were extremely cold. He now knew that the real beast besieged by the Lord of Sword Dao wasn't the 7 sects of the 9 domains, but the experts from celestial 9 domains behind them. However, when the Sword Dao sect was besieged, the 7 sects also contributed a lot and could be considered as accomplices. Celestial 9 domains hadn't opened yet, and with Chu Fengmian's current strength, he couldn't go to Celestial 9 domains to find the real culprits who besieged the Lord of Sword Dao. The Lord of Sword Dao was besieged and fell as the ruler of a generation. Those who could participate were all immortal venerables and even immortal emperors. Chu Fengmian didn't dare to rashly confront them. With his current strength, facing immortal venerables and immortal emperors was like hitting a rock with an egg. Chu Fengmian wasn't a reckless person. Chu Fengmian couldn't take revenge on the experts of Celestial 9 domains, but he could start with the 7 sects of the 9 domains. The ancient desolate white wolf needed at least a month or 2 to condense an avatar. Since the avatar had been used, it had to be fully utilized. The grudges from 10,000 years ago could be settled today. Let's go. Chu Fengmian left the sword domain after devouring the blood essence of the old poison master, Protector King Crescent, and the others. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. The spectating experts were unable to clearly see what had happened. They only felt that the 8 battle sages and the other 6 immortal kings had all fallen. What exactly happened? The 8 battle sages, Qian Yuan, the old poison master, the Mizar Hall leader, these undefeatable people have all fallen? Even an immortal general would be scared to death by him. These were 6 immortal kings, and all of them had actually fallen at this moment. Especially when they saw an incomparably huge figure following Chu Fengmian out of the sword domain, everyone was completely stunned. For a moment they were all talking nonsense. Ancient desolate white wolf. This is an ancient desolate white wolf. This person actually subdued an ancient desolate white wolf. How is that possible? What the hell is going on? How could this be? The ancient desolate white wolf was the overlord of the desolate beast clan. It was simply impossible to subdue an ancient desolate white wolf. The desolate beast race had inherited the violent bloodline of the heaven-devouring beast. It was almost impossible to subdue them. The ancient desolate white wolf was the overlord of the desolate beast race. It was almost unheard of for someone to subdue an ancient desolate white wolf. But now, this ancient desolate white wolf was standing beside Chu Fengmian with a respectful expression. It had submitted to Chu Fengmian. Even if they racked their brains, they still could not figure out how Chu Fengmian could subdue such a terrifying desolate beast. They had seen how the ancient desolate white wolf had severely injured the 6 celestial kings in the blink of an eye. It's too terrifying. Let's go. Let's go, we can't be enemies with this person. Immediately, many of the spectating demon immortals hurriedly showed mercy. Many of them still wanted to take advantage of Chu Fengmian and fish in troubled waters to gain some benefit. But now, even the 8 battle saints, Qian Yuan, Mizar Palace Master, These famous invincible experts in the history of the 9 regions had died in Chu Fengmian's hands. They no longer dared to have such thoughts and left one after another. Chu Fengmian did not stop them. These immortal generals and demon immortals were no longer in Chu Fengmian's eyes. Their essence blood could not condense the inscription of the immortal true body. Killing them was just a waste of time. The incarnation of the ancient desolate white wolf could only be maintained for 2 hours. In these 2 hours, Chu Fengmian had to use the incarnation of the ancient desolate white wolf to do more things. Ancient desolate white wolf, go and help Alcade Star Emperor. After killing the 8 battle saints and the others, only Raging Flame Sword Emperor was left among the experts of the 7 major sections. He was now in the sky, fighting Alcade Star Emperor. His attention was completely focused on fighting Alcade Star Emperor, so he had no idea what was happening on Chu Fengmian's side. After Chu Fengmian left the sword domain with the ancient desolate white wolf, he looked at Raging Flame Sword Emperor and pointed at him. Yes. The ancient desolation white wolf replied respectfully. Then, he turned into a white light and charged towards the Raging Flame Sword Emperor. Although the ancient desolate white wolf's body was thousands of feet tall, his speed was astonishingly fast. Raging Flame Sword Emperor could not react in time and was bombarded by the ancient desolate white wolf's claw. Ancient desolate white wolf? The Raging Flame Sword Monarch's expression changed when he saw the primordial desolate white wolf. He took several steps back and barely dodged the attack. At the same time, he noticed that Chu Fengmian was standing there unscathed. The aura of the 8 battle saints, Qian Yuan, and the others had all disappeared. Obviously, they had all fallen. This is a trap to attract the experts of the 7 major sects and catch all of them in one fell swoop. Raging Flame Sword Emperor reacted after seeing all of this. Looking at Alcade Star Emperor and the ancient desolate white wolf besieging him again, he immediately turned his body and quickly turned into an escape light to escape into the distance. Since you're here, there's no need to leave. Raging Flame Sword Emperor, the #1 sword master of the Tianjian sect. Today, I'll have a taste of your swordsmanship. However, Chu Fengmian's figure suddenly appeared in front of Raging Flame Sword Emperor. He held the sword with both hands and stared at Raging Flame Sword Emperor. Calm. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2279. Brat, you think you can stop me? Raging Sword Emperor laughed in anger when he saw Chu Fengmian standing in his way. He wanted to escape now because he was afraid of the ancient desolate white wolf and Alcade Star Emperor, not Chu Fengmian. From the beginning, he had never put Chu Fengmian in his eyes. But now, Chu Fengmian dared to stand in his way. Go to hell! Raging Sword Emperor shouted coldly. Suddenly, a shocking sword light burst out from his palm and slashed down. The power of this sword was completely different from the power of the 8 war saints. Even though they were both immortal kings, there was still a gap in strength. Raging Sword Emperor's strength had reached the pinnacle of the immortal king realm. Each of his sword strikes contained earth-shattering power. Chu Fengmian even felt that Raging Sword Emperor's strength was close to the immortal monarch realm. It was no wonder that even the Alcade Star Monarch was unable to kill him in a short time. Chu Fengmian didn't dodge. Facing the sword strike, he struck out with both swords. Yin and Yang circulated in his swords, activating the power of Yin-Yang sword technique. Chu Fengmian's immortal true body had already condensed the 2nd inscription, and even the embryonic form of the 3rd inscription had been condensed. His strength had also skyrocketed compared to before, surpassing ordinary immortal king expert. This time, Chu Fengmian wanted to test his strength with Raging Sword Emperor. Bang! The 2 swords collided with each other at lightning speed. In the next moment, they separated. The force of the collision was enough to shatter an entire continent into pieces. Fortunately, they were in the depths of the void. No matter how strong the force was, it couldn't affect the entire void. If it was outside, just the aftershock of this collision alone would be enough to kill all the living beings within a radius of several hundred kilometers. What a powerful force! Under the collision of Chu Fengmian's sword, he was forced to take a few steps back. Even with his current strength, he was still forced to retreat under this sword. Although Chu Fengmian had countless opportunities and his immortal true body had condensed the third inscription, he was still slightly inferior to the Raging Flame Sword Emperor in terms of power. The Raging Flame Sword Emperor's strength was infinitely close to the 6th level of the 9th Order Immortal Realm, the High Immortal Realm. To him, he was just short of a few opportunities, an opportunity, and he would be able to truly step into the Immortal Realm. With such strength, he was indeed worthy of being the #1 sword master of the Tianjian sect. However, although there was a difference in strength, it was not impossible to make up for it. The key to a fight between sword cultivators was the collision of sword intent and sword principles. In an instant, a shocking sword will burst out from Chu Fengmian's body. The ancient book of swordsmanship appeared above Chu Fengmian's head, and the sword will that burst out was all added to the sword in Chu Fengmian's hand. Suddenly, Chu Fengmian moved again. He slashed at Raging Flame Sword Emperor again, combining the two swords and slashing down with Chu Fengmian's sword Dao. Humph! Raging Flame Sword Emperor snorted coldly at the same time. His sword intent soared into the sky and burst out. The sword intent of Raging Flame Sword Emperor contained boundless and violent power, like flames. The moment his sword intent soared into the sky, it seemed as if the whole sky was about to be set ablaze. With the sword intent added to his sword, Raging Flame Sword Emperor also slashed out with his sword. The two swords collided once again. This time, the collision was not only about the power of the two swords, but also the clash of their sword intent. Boom! A mass of violent energy suddenly exploded. Both Chu Fengmian and Sword Emperor Raging Blaze retreated at the same time, but this time, Sword Emperor Raging Blaze was the one who retreated the most. His clothes were torn and tattered. He had suffered a small loss under the sword. In terms of pure strength, Chu Fengmian was indeed inferior to Raging Flame Sword Emperor. However, in terms of sword Dao and sword intent, Chu Fengmian was not afraid of anyone. Chu Fengmian's sword Dao had already surpassed the level of an ordinary immortal emperor. No matter how powerful Raging Flame Sword Emperor was, Chu Fengmian still had the upper hand in the clash of sword intent. Again, Chu Fengmian laughed loudly and took another step forward. In an instant, he displayed dozens of sword techniques and slashed towards Raging Flame Sword Emperor. Raging Flame Sword Emperor did not show any weakness and countered with his sword. In an instant, dozens of sword techniques collided with each other. The two silhouettes clashed in the air. Every clash was a clash of swords, each and every move was extremely ferocious. Even for ordinary immortal kings, they wouldn't be able to interfere at all. On the other side, Ancient Desolation White Wolf and Alcade Star Emperor did not take any action. They just watched from the side. Senior Brother Chu's strength has reached such a level. His sword technique has improved compared to his previous life. Alcade Star Emperor looked at Chu Fengmian's direction with a hint of surprise in her eyes. She had always addressed Chu Fengmian as her senior brother. Although Alcade Star Emperor had not formally acknowledged the master of Sword Dao as her master, Chu Fengmian had taught her swordsmanship. To her, the master of Sword Dao could be considered half her master. Watching Chu Fengmian and Raging Flame Sword Emperor fight without showing any weakness, she was very surprised. Chu Fengmian's terrifying swordsmanship in her previous life was only known to a small number of people in the kendo school. She was one of them. Especially as she grew stronger, she understood that Chu Fengmian's attainments in the kendo school had reached an incredible level. It was a pity that Chu Fengmian in the previous life did not have any power. He only had a sword technique, but he could not display it. In this life, Chu Fengmian had fully displayed the swordsmanship of his previous life. Even now, as Chu Fengmian's strength grew stronger, his swordsmanship surpassed that of his previous life. He was on par with Raging Flame Sword Emperor despite crossing 5 realms. Even in several confrontations, Chu Fengmian had the upper hand. Sect Master's strength, not only Alcade Star Emperor, but even Ancient Desolation White Wolf was shocked. He had once fought with Chu Fengmian on the Jade Desolate Star. At that time, Chu Fengmian's strength was at the peak of the Immortal Marquis realm. It was difficult for him to fight against an immortal king. But in the blink of an eye, Chu Fengmian was now able to fight with Raging Flame Sword Emperor. The speed of his strength improvement had shocked him. All the geniuses, even the monstrous geniuses born in the Desolation era, had never been comparable to Chu Fengmian. Damn it, where did this kid get such a terrifying sword technique? In the sky, after the 2 figures clashed again, one of them quickly retreated. It was Raging Flame Sword Emperor. Chapter 2280. Raging Flame Sword Emperor stepped back and stared at Chu Fengmian nervously. He looked at Chu Fengmian as if he was looking at a monster. He was at a disadvantage in the clash of swords. He was completely suppressed by Chu Fengmian, which was something he had never dreamt of. He was much stronger than Chu Fengmian, but he had lost to Chu Fengmian several times in the clash of sword intents. The clash of sword intents was the most important thing in a fight between sword cultivators. Even though he was stronger than Chu Fengmian, his sword intent was suppressed, so he couldn't exert his strength and was beaten back by Chu Fengmian time and time again. He had never thought that he would be completely suppressed in terms of sword intent. His comprehension of Sword Dao could be said to be number 1 in Sky Sword Sect. In fact, his Sword Dao was even more terrifying than his strength. He had already reached the level of Immortal Monarch and was approaching the level of Immortal Sage. He had never been suppressed in terms of sword intent. But today, he met Chu Fengmian, a sword cultivator monster. Even the master of Sword Dao, who was once the ruler of a generation, once said that Chu Fengmian's Sword Dao comprehension was above his. Even Chu Fengmian's Sword Dao comprehension in his previous life was far superior to Raging Flame Sword Emperor's. Moreover, Chu Fengmian had been reborn in this life with even greater opportunities. His understanding of the Sword Dao far surpassed that of his previous life, surpassing ordinary sword cultivator immortal emperors. No matter how strong this Raging Flame Sword Emperor was, he still couldn't defeat him. No matter how strong Raging Flame Sword Emperor was, his Sword Dao and sword intent were suppressed by Chu Fengmian. He could only exert 50 to 60% of his strength at most. Damn it! Raging Scorching Sword Emperor was enraged to the extreme. Being beaten by a half-step Celestial Realm martial artist was a great humiliation to him. Raging Flame. Life Destruction. Raging Flame Sword Emperor raised the spiritual sword in his hand, which was burning with red flames. He suddenly slashed down. The red flames were like a sea of fire crashing down. This sea of fire was boundless. The burning flames were extremely red, even blood red. It was as if they could burn everything in the world to ashes. Life fire. The moment Alcade Star Emperor and the ancient White Wolf saw the flame, their eyes flashed with surprise, and they couldn't help but ask. Raging Scorching Sword Emperor has even used his life fire. Has he been forced to this extent by the sect master? The red flame was known as life fire. According to legend, it was a flame that burned with the blood essence of profound heaven realm experts. This burning vital fire was similar to Raging Scorching Sword Emperor's life force that was constantly burning. It was much stronger than ordinary flames. Even the 9 heavenly flames couldn't compare to the vital fire formed by an immortal king burning his life force. This kind of flame was a desperate move. Alcade Star Monarch and Ancient Desolate White Wolf didn't expect Raging Blaze Sword Monarch to be forced to use his life fire so quickly. Raging Scorching Sword Emperor did not use his life fire when he was fighting with Alcade Star Emperor. However, for Raging Scorching Sword Emperor, it was much more frustrating than when he was fighting Alcade Star Emperor. Although Alcade Star Emperor was stronger than him, Raging Scorching Sword Emperor still had a chance to fight back. However, he was completely suppressed by Chu Fengmian. No matter how powerful he was, he couldn't display his strength. This made Raging Scorching Sword Emperor so angry that he directly used his life fire. He was indeed inferior to Chu Fengmian in the clash of sword wills. However, the life fire was pure strength. With such a huge gap between their cultivation levels, he could kill Chu Fengmian with pure strength. Boom! The sea of fire formed by the life fire swept over, causing Chu Fengmian to take a step back. Chu Fengmian could feel that he was almost burned to ashes by the life fire. One should know that Chu Fengmian cultivated the art of 5 chaotic emperors and condensed the ice fire divine body. Ordinary flames couldn't hurt Chu Fengmian at all. However, before the life fire touched Chu Fengmian, it almost injured Chu Fengmian. This life fire is indeed terrifying. It's worthy of being Raging Scorching Sword Emperor's desperate move. Raging Scorching Sword Emperor was an invincible expert at the peak of the Immortal King realm. He couldn't control his strength to the extreme. Now that he was burning his life fire, the power of the life fire was far beyond the peak of the Immortal King realm. Given his means, even immortal lords would not dare to fight him head-on when he activated his life fire. Sect Master! Senior Brother! Alcade Star Emperor and the Ancient White Wolf saw this and were ready to help. However, Chu Fengmian glanced over and stopped them. I'll deal with this person myself. The moment Chu Fengmian spoke, his figure flashed and rushed towards Raging Scorching Sword Emperor. Chu Fengmian didn't have any way to resist the life fire. However, he didn't need to resist the life fire today. He only needed to kill Raging Scorching Sword Emperor. Once Raging Scorching Sword Emperor died, the life fire would naturally be extinguished. Chu Fengmian's figure was extremely fast. He rushed towards Raging Scorching Sword Emperor in an instant. Raging Scorching Sword Emperor's expression didn't change. He saw Chu Fengmian's movement and his sword flashed. Whoosh! The sea of fire formed by the life fire immediately gathered towards him. It turned into a huge sea of fire around him. Raging Scorching Sword Emperor was in the middle of the sea of fire. In order to reach him, one had to pass through the sea of fire formed by the life fire. Humph! Seeing that Raging Scorching Sword Emperor was surrounded by the life fire, he didn't retreat. Instead, he sped up and rushed towards Raging Scorching Sword Emperor. In the blink of an eye, Chu Fengmian rushed into the life fire. The life fire couldn't stop Chu Fengmian's escape light. Courting death. Seeing Chu Fengmian rushing into the life fire, Raging Scorching Sword Emperor's face turned ferocious. He suddenly waved his hand. In the sea of fire that was formed by the life fire, clusters of flames gathered and transformed into gigantic flaming longswords. All of a sudden, they slashed towards Chu Fengmian. Boom! The flaming longswords were formed by Raging Scorching Sword Emperor's sword skills and life fire. They contained extremely terrifying power and slashed towards Chu Fengmian in an instant. Sky Splitter! Just as the flaming longswords approached Chu Fengmian suddenly roared. His two swords merged together. All of a sudden, Chu Fengmian's sword intent and power gathered in the two swords. All the power contained in the ancient book of sword principles was added to the two sword. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2281. The two swords combined and slashed out at the same time. It was as if the sword edge could split the heavens and earth. The sword edge that could split the heavens and earth suddenly exploded and swept across everything. The flaming longswords that were slashing towards Chu Fengmian were all shattered by the sword edge. The power of the sword was unstoppable. Even the sea of fire that was formed by the life fire was sliced open by the heaven-splitting sword. Without the protection of the sea of fire, raging scorching sword Emperor's body fell into Chu Fengmian's line of sight. Die! Chu Fengmian took a step forward. With his space Dao, he appeared beside raging flame sword Emperor in the blink of an eye. His two swords circulated the power of the stars as they slashed down viciously. Sword! Raging scorching sword Emperor felt a sense of danger and immediately drew his sword. The two swords clashed. 9 moves of primogeniture. However, at the moment when the swords clashed, 6 enormous dragon claws formed above Chu Fengmian's head and slammed towards raging scorching sword Emperor. The dragon claws that contained the first 6 moves of primogeniture suddenly appeared and slammed towards raging scorching sword Emperor. Bang! Raging scorching sword Emperor was not prepared for this as he was fully focused on controlling the life fire. He did not expect Chu Fengmian to break through the life fire and rush in. It was already too late when he wanted to gather his strength again. The 6 dragon claws slammed onto raging scorching sword Emperor's body and he was instantly sent flying. He spat out a large amount of blood essence and flew dozens of miles away. Raging scorching sword Emperor had just stabilized himself when he was sent flying. However, he did not recover from his injuries. Instead, he activated his flying light and escaped into the distance. Raging scorching sword Emperor knew that he was no match for Chu Fengmian and wanted to escape. His flying light was extremely fast. Chu Fengmian immediately chased after him. However, at this moment, a flame suddenly shrouded Chu Fengmian. The flame was the life fire that raging scorching sword Emperor had formed previously. It suddenly shrouded Chu Fengmian and made it difficult for him to move forward. The moment Chu Fengmian saw the life fire, his face turned pale. Chu Fengmian had experienced the power of the life fire before. Unless he used all his strength to activate the sky-splitting sword, his other sword skills would not be able to break through the life fire. Chu Fengmian had just used the heaven-splitting sword, and now he couldn't use it a second time. This was the strongest swordsmanship that Chu Fengmian had created. Every time he used it, it consumed a huge amount of energy. After using the sky-splitting sword, Chu Fengmian felt a little exhausted. Looking at the life fire in front of him, Chu Fengmian knew that he would not be able to catch up this time. However, Chu Fengmian wasn't going to let the raging flame sword Emperor escape. It wasn't easy for Chu Fengmian to force an expert like sword Emperor Raging Blaze into a desperate situation. Naturally, he wouldn't let him escape. Kill him! Chu Fengmian shouted at Alcade Star Emperor and Ancient Desolation White Wolf on the other side. The two of them activated their escape lights and chased after Raging Flame Sword Emperor. Raging Flame Sword Emperor had just suffered the attack of the 6 battle dragon claws and was now severely injured. Moreover, he had burned his life fire in order to fight against Chu Fengmian. This was an extremely serious injury for Raging Flame Sword Emperor. After all, not everyone had a body like Chu Fengmian. Now, Chu Fengmian's body was much stronger than the real Wild Beast clan. Moreover, Raging Flame Sword Emperor didn't have Chu Fengmian's recovery ability. Under the pursuit of Alcade Star Emperor and Ancient Desolation White Wolf, a wave of energy came from afar. A few minutes later, Alcade Star Emperor and Ancient Desolation White Wolf returned. In the palm of the Ancient Desolation White Wolf, there was a ball of blood. It was Raging Flame Sword Emperor's blood essence. Beside Chu Fengmian, Raging Flame Sword Emperor's life fire had completely disappeared. Sword Emperor Raging Flame, a peak immortal king, had fallen. Unfortunately, I still couldn't kill him with my own hands. Chu Fengmian walked out slowly and couldn't help but sigh. This time, Chu Fengmian wanted to kill Raging Flame Sword Emperor with his own hands, but he failed in the end. If Alcade Star Emperor and Ancient Desolation White Wolf weren't there, Raging Flame Sword Emperor would have escaped. Once he stepped into the Tianjian sect, Chu Fengmian wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Chu Fengmian didn't have the ability to rush into the Tianjian sect to kill Raging Flame Sword Emperor. After all, the Tianjian sect's mountain guarding array was said to be from the mysterious Tianjiu domain. It was set up by a mysterious expert from the Tianjiu domain. If he rushed into it recklessly, he would only die. Not only the Tianjian sect, but also the mountain guarding array of the 7 major sections. They were much more powerful than the mountain guarding array of the ordinary sections. Chu Fengmian had seen it before, so he knew how powerful it was. Fortunately, Chu Fengmian wasn't fighting Sword Emperor Raging Blaze alone this time. He had Alcade Star Emperor and Desolate White Wolf, 2 peak Immortal King experts by his side. That was why Sword Emperor Raging Blaze was killed on the spot. To be able to force a peak Immortal King expert into a desperate situation, even with the help of his life fire, he couldn't defeat Senior Brother. Such a battle record is enough to shock the 9 domains. Alcade Star Emperor came over at this time. He looked at Chu Fengmian with a sigh and couldn't help but say, "If it wasn't for Senior Brother's sword principle, I'm afraid I wouldn't dare to come and meet you." The current Chu Fengmian, whether in appearance or strength, was completely different from his previous life. He didn't look like a person at all. The only things that didn't change were Chu Fengmian's sword principle and his character. From these 2 points, Alcade Star Emperor dared to recognize Chu Fengmian as Chu Jianbai in his previous life. It's just Raging Flame Sword Emperor. I can't force other peak Immortal Kings into a desperate situation. Chu Fengmian shook his head and said. This time, Chu Fengmian forced Raging Flame Sword Emperor into a desperate situation, but he didn't feel confident. He knew that the biggest reason he could do this was not because of Chu Fengmian, but because of Raging Flame Sword Emperor. Because Raging Flame Sword Emperor was a sword cultivator. In a battle between sword cultivators, sword intent and sword principle determined everything. This was also why Chu Fengmian could suppress Raging Flame Sword Emperor from the beginning. Chu Fengmian could force Raging Flame Sword Emperor into a desperate situation because he could only exert 50 to 60% of his strength at most. If it was another peak Immortal King expert, Chu Fengmian could at most contend with him, which was the limit. Chu Fengmian's strength was still far from that of a peak Immortal King expert. Calm. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2282. Moreover, even if Chu Fengmian's sword intent suppressed Raging Flame Sword Emperor, he still failed to kill him. Instead, the Sword Emperor found a chance to escape. Although Raging Flame Sword Emperor was severely injured, he was the invincible forefather of the Tianjian sect. There were many treasures in the Tianjian sect that could heal his injuries. If he was allowed to escape, he would be able to recover in a few days. The 7 great sects' foundation was unfathomable. They had ruled the 9 regions for 10,000 years, so no one knew how many treasures they had accumulated. Therefore, no matter how severe their injuries were, the experts of the 7 sects would be able to recover as long as they escaped. Therefore, Chu Fengmian tried his best to kill the experts of the 7 great sections. Sect Master, this is Raging Flame Sword Emperor's essence blood. The ancient Desolation White Wolf walked over. His body had shrunk to only 7 or 8 meters. As a Desolation beast, he couldn't transform into a human, but he could control the size of his body. Of course, his 1,000-meter body was his true form. Only in that state could he exert his strongest power. By forcefully shrinking his body like this, even his strength would be restricted. Okay. Chu Fengmian took the blood essence from Sword Emperor Raging Blaze and activated the Heaven-Devouring Secret Technique. Through the Heaven-Devouring Secret Technique, Sword Emperor Raging Blaze's blood essence was transformed into extremely pure immortal power and poured into Chu Fengmian's body. It was immediately devoured by the 3rd inscription in the immortal true body. The essence blood of Raging Flame Sword Emperor was much more powerful than the essence blood of Mizar Palace Master and the Old Poison Master. It was almost equivalent to the essence blood of 7 or 8 ordinary immortal kings. The essence blood of Raging Flame Sword Emperor was completely devoured by the third inscription. Chu Fengmian felt that the third inscription of the immortal true body was about to be completed. As long as Chu Fengmian casually killed an immortal king and seized their essence blood, he would be able to condense the third inscription. After devouring the essence blood of Raging Flame Sword Emperor, Chu Fengmian's aura didn't change much. The inscription of the immortal true body could only exert its strongest power when it was completely condensed. At that time, Chu Fengmian's strength would soar again. In the blink of an eye, Chu Fengmian refined the essence blood of Raging Flame Sword Emperor and integrated it into the land of inscription of his immortal true body. Chu Fengmian was also thinking about what he had learned from the battle with Sword Emperor Raging Flame. A peak-stage Immortal King expert like the Raging Flame Sword Emperor has many methods. It's truly difficult to kill him alone. In the future, when we encounter peak-stage Immortal Kings, we have to be careful. Chu Fengmian muttered to himself. This was the first time Chu Fengmian had encountered an expert at the peak of the Immortal King realm. Chu Fengmian had gained a lot from this fight. Not only could he confirm Chu Fengmian's current strength, but he also knew how terrifying a peak Immortal King realm expert was. Compared to the 8 battle saints, Qianyun, and the rest, the Raging Flame Sword Emperor's strength was clearly several times stronger. Even if Chu Fengmian went all out, it would still be difficult for him to kill an expert of this level. An expert at the peak of the Immortal King realm has many life-saving methods. It's indeed difficult to kill him. Even if it's me, if the Raging Flame Sword Emperor is determined to escape, I won't be able to kill him. Alcade Star Emperor nodded and said, I can kill him with my true body, but this incarnation is far from enough. Ancient Desolate White Wolf also said. His true body was an invincible wild beast at the peak of the Immortal Monarch realm, so he wasn't afraid of the Raging Flame Sword Emperor. However, even if his incarnation could defeat the Raging Flame Sword Emperor, it would still be difficult for him to kill him. It was easy to defeat an expert of this level, but it was incomparably difficult to kill him. If the Raging Flame Sword Emperor had made up his mind to escape from the beginning, even if Chu Fengmian and the other two joined forces, they might not be able to stop him. However, the Raging Flame Sword Emperor was enraged by Chu Fengmian and kept fighting with Chu Fengmian. In the end, he was severely injured and had to flee. Alcade Star Emperor and Ancient Desolate White Wolf caught up with him and killed him together. This time, the 7 major sects have suffered heavy losses. After losing so many experts, the 7 major sects will need thousands of years to recover. Alcade Star Emperor couldn't help but sigh. The 7 great sects had indeed suffered a great loss this time. They had lost 8 immortal kings, including the Raging Flame Sword Emperor, who was at the peak of the Immortal King realm. Such a loss could be said to be the greatest loss the 7 great sects had suffered since the war with the Sword Dao sect 10,000 years ago. Recover? I want the 7 great sects to cease to exist in the 9 regions. Chu Fengmian's eyes were incomparably cold when he heard Alcade Star Emperor's words. The 7 great sects had besieged Chu Fengmian this time, so it was time for Chu Fengmian to give them a big gift. Ancient Desolate White Wolf, how long can your incarnation last? Chu Fengmian looked at the Ancient Desolate White Wolf and asked. There's still about an hour left. In order to stop the Raging Flame Sword Emperor, I used a secret technique and consumed a lot of energy. Ancient Desolate White Wolf said. Half an hour is enough. Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with coldness. Let's go. Let's go to the Tianjian sect. Chu Fengmian's killing intent was bursting. He suddenly tore the space apart and stepped out, returning to the 9 regions. Alcade Star Emperor and the Ancient Desolate White Wolf followed closely behind, returning to the 9 regions from the depths of the void. In the depths of the void, many onlookers finally dared to show their faces at this time. The battle between Chu Fengmian and raging scorching Sword Emperor was too terrifying. Even the slightest ripple from the battle was enough to make them die a tragic death. In the face of a peak immortal king realm expert, these immortal generals and immortal marquises were just like ant. Crack. On the other side, the gate of the sword domain slowly closed. Although everyone present knew that behind the door was the legendary High Sword sect, at that moment, no one dared to take a step forward. Just now, 6 immortal kings were trapped behind the gate of the sword domain. Even immortal kings couldn't break free from the restriction on the gate of the sword domain. As immortal generals and immortal marquises, only death awaited them if they stepped in. Although they knew that there were endless treasures behind the gate of the sword domain, no one dared to take a step forward. They could only watch the gate of the sword domain disappear from afar. The sword domain was constantly changing its position. If it disappeared this time, no one knew where it would be next time. This was also the reason why Chu Fengmian summoned the gate of the sword domain without any scruples. Anyway, the sword domain would constantly change its position. Except for Chu Fengmian, who had the inheritance of the sword sect and the sword emperor crown, no one else could find it. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2283. As the gate of the sword domain disappeared, the depths of the void became quiet. Chu Fengmian is going to the Tianjian sect? What is he going to do? All the warriors and monster gods in the void heard Chu Fengmian's last words, and their expressions changed dramatically. Suddenly, a crazy idea popped up in their mind. Is he going to attack the Tianjian sect? Is he crazy? This guess caused everyone present to jump in fright. For a moment, they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Chu Fengmian's enmity with the Tianjian sect was as deep as the sea. This time, the 5 sword masters of the sword sect, the Phantom Sword Master and the Raging Flame Sword Emperor, were all killed by Chu Fengmian. Once Chu Fengmian went to the Tianjian sect, it was only possible that he was going to attack the Tianjian sect. Attacking the Tianjian sect? Is this really possible? Some warriors and monster gods of the 9 domains were stunned for a moment. In their eyes, the Tianjian sect was a colossus in the 9 domains, and no one had ever been able to shake it. Except for the destruction of 9 Demon City by the 6 demon sects, even the attacks of countless forces in the extraterritorial starry sky didn't affect the status of the 7 great sects. Now, Chu Fengmian was going to attack the Tianjian sect. In the eyes of many, this was almost crazy. Others don't dare to do it, but Chu Fengmian might. He is from the Sword Dao sect. An old man muttered to himself. The Sword Dao sect once fought against the 7 great sects 10,000 years ago. That battle was earth-shattering, and countless experts died. Even the rivers of the 9 domains were filled with blood. It took hundreds of years for the 9 domains to return to their original state. This time, he has the help of the ancient Desolation White Wolf and the Alcade Star Emperor. He might be able to attack the Tianjian sect. A warrior couldn't help but say, "Let's go and see." Many warriors left the depths of the void and flew directly in the direction of the Tianjian sect. They also wanted to see such a shocking battle with their own eyes. The news that Chu Fengmian was about to attack the Tianjian sect had spread like wildfire. Even many experts in the 9 domains had heard the news and were now rushing towards the Tianjian sect. Central Region, Heaven Sword City. The Heavenly Sword City was equivalent to the Sword City. Like the Sword City, it was a gateway for the Tianjian sect to the outside world. Many of the sects under the Tianjian sect were built in the Heaven Sword City. However, the real location of the Tianjian sect was in a separate small world. The 7 great sects of the 9 regions all had their own small world. Many of the sects controlled more than just one small world. Some even controlled 3 or 4 small worlds. The Divine Tree Mystery Realm that Chu Fengmian had been to before was just a small world under the control of the barren ancient sect. It was not where the barren ancient sect was located. The entrances to these small worlds were in the Heaven Sword City. In the depths of the void of the 9 domains, there were layers upon layers of minor worlds. There were tens of thousands of minor worlds, and many of them were incomparably dangerous. Even Chu Fengmian would find it difficult to find the true location of the Heavenly Sword sect. Therefore, he did not waste his energy and went directly to the Heaven Sword City. As long as Chu Fengmian opened the gate to the Heaven Sword City, he could also enter the Tianjian sect. This time, Chu Fengmian was attacking, not sneaking in. Today, he was going to attack the Tianjian sect openly. A large number of experts had already gathered outside the Heaven Sword City. Almost all the experts in the 9 domains had gathered at once and were looking up at the sky. They had all heard the rumors that Chu Fengmian was about to attack the Tianjian sect. They all wanted to witness this scene. In addition to watching the show, many of the experts also wanted to take advantage of the situation. Once Chu Fengmian attacked the Tianjian sect, it would inevitably cause chaos. There were many people who wanted to take advantage of the chaos. Attacking the Tianjian sect. This is the first time someone has dared to attack the Tianjian sect since the Great War 10,000 years ago. It is said that Chu Fengmian is only a half-step celestial being. With such strength, he dares to attack the Tianjian sect? Many experts still did not know that Chu Fengmian had killed many immortal kings in the depths of the void. When they heard that Chu Fengmian was going to attack the Tianjian sect, they all thought that Chu Fengmian was crazy. On the contrary, only a few experts were looking at the sky with solemn gazes. They had heard the news of the great battle in the depths of the void. Chu Fengmian had slain an immortal king all by himself, and in the end, he had forced Raging Blazing Sword into a corner. The news had already spread. Although the real person who killed Raging Flame Sword Emperor was Alcade Star Emperor and the Primordial White Wolf, Chu Fengmian's ability to defeat Raging Flame Sword Emperor had already established Chu Fengmian's current strength. They no longer regarded Chu Fengmian as a genius or a half-step celestial being. With such strength, he was definitely an expert who stood at the peak of the 9 regions. Even if the Tianjian sect wins this battle, it will be a Pyrrhic victory. An old man could not help but say, "Look, the great array of Heaven Sword City has been activated." Suddenly, someone pointed in the direction of Heaven Sword City and shouted in surprise. In the sky above the Heaven Sword City, an incomparably huge array formation suddenly activated, enveloping the entire Heaven Sword City within it. Above the array formation, energy circulated, and even many Heaven Realm experts felt fear in their hearts when they saw the energy within the array formation, not daring to approach it. It seems that the Tianjian sect has also received the news. The Great Array has been activated. It seems that the Tianjian sect is also waiting for it this time. With such a formation, the Great Array of Heaven Sword City has not been activated for 10,000 years. Seeing the Great Array above Heaven Sword City, many people sighed incomparably. The Tianjian sect, as one of the 7 great sects of the 9 regions and a colossus that had ruled the 9 regions for 10,000 years, was facing Chu Fengmian at this moment. Obviously, even the Tianjian sect did not dare to underestimate Chu Fengmian's strength. Look, they are experts from the Silver Sword sect, the Spiritual Radiance Sword sect, the Cloud Sword sect, and other sword sections. One figure after another flew out from the Heaven Sword City. They stood at the edge of the great array that enveloped the Heaven Sword City, waiting for the attack. These figures were almost all experts above the celestial being realm. The Silver Sword sect, the Spiritual Radiance Sword sect, the Cloud Sword sect. They were all sword sects under the Tianjian sect. They submitted to the Tianjian sect. Although the strength of each of these sword sects was not strong, once they were added together, they were still an incomparably huge force. Among these figures, there were 30 to 40 experts who had stepped into the celestial being realm. As for experts above the immortal generals, there were more than a dozen, and even 2 immortal marquises. Chapter 2284. The Tianjian sect is indeed worthy of being one of the 7 great sects of the 9 regions. The experts of the Tianjian sect haven't even made a move yet. Just the sword sects under the Tianjian sect have so many experts. Some warriors couldn't help but exclaim when they saw the dozens of figures slashing above the Sky Sword City's great array. Dozens of Sky Realm experts, more than a dozen immortal generals, and 2 immortal marquis experts. Such a force was comparable to some of the great forces from the outer realms. For example, the 100 Extremes Star Domain Alliance formed by hundreds of star domains had about the same number of experts. Perhaps there were more Sky Realm experts, but at most there were only 2 immortal generals. But now there were so many experts in the sword sects under the Tianjian sect alone. This force had always been hidden under the Tianjian sect and hadn't been noticed. Now that it was revealed, many people were shocked. These people are going to risk their lives to protect the Sky Sword City. Seeing the experts from the various sword sects standing outside the Sky Sword City, some warriors couldn't help but speak. Their foundation is in the Sky Sword City. Naturally, they will defend the Sky Sword City to the death. Another warrior spoke. These sword Dao sects were all located in the Sky Sword City. If Chu Fengmian wanted to attack the Tianjian sect, the first place he would attack was the gate to the Tianjian sect, Sword Dao City. The experts of the various sword sects in the Sky Sword City didn't want to give up their foundation, so they could only defend it to the death. The people from the 7 great sects don't seem to have appeared. Suddenly, someone noticed that other than the people from the sword sects, the people from the 7 great sects didn't appear. Even the Sky Realm experts didn't appear. They clearly knew that Chu Fengmian was about to attack, but the experts of the Tianjian sect didn't seem to know at all. None of the true experts appeared. What's going on? Just as everyone was still discussing, the sky above the Sky Sword City suddenly opened up. The space was suddenly torn apart and turned into a spatial tunnel. This spatial tunnel was extremely stable, and 3 figures slowly walked out from it. 2 people and 1 wolf. The moment the 3 figures walked out, everyone could clearly feel the terrifying power coming from the sky. A huge power soared up from behind the 3 of them, enveloping the entire sky. The boundless sky was dyed red by this power. What kind of power is this? It's enough to affect the sky within a radius of 10 million li. Some warriors were stunned when they saw this and asked in a daze. Everywhere he looked, the space had been enveloped by this enormous force. As one of the largest cities in the 9 regions, the Sky Sword City appeared incomparably small in front of this power. That man is Chu Fengmian. Who is the woman beside him? Suddenly, someone noticed the young woman standing beside Chu Fengmian. She was as mysterious as the stars. The power of the stars gathered on her purple robes. The power of the stars. It's someone from the Alpha Hall. Noticing the power of the stars above, a cultivator asked. Alpha Hall? Wasn't Alpha Hall one of the 7 great sects? Why is someone from Alpha Hall standing with Chu Fengmian? Is Alpha Hall going to war with the Tianjian sect? Many warriors and demon gods who didn't know what was going on were even more confused when they saw this scene. Only some old men said with a dignified face, "That's Alcade's Star Emperor." Alcade's Star Emperor? Who's that? Some experts from the extraterritorial starry sky were stunned. They had heard of the experts from the 9 regions, but they had never heard of this name. However, when the experts from the 9 regions heard this name, their eyes were filled with disbelief. Alcade's Star Emperor? The number 1 genius of Alpha Hall since ancient times? It's her? Didn't she not appear again after she betrayed the Sky Pivot Hall thousands of years later? After the rumor, she went to the 3 great sacred realms. Why is she here now? No wonder Chu Fengmian dares to attack the Tianjian sect. He actually found Alcade's Star Emperor as a helper. What's the relationship between Alcade's Star Emperor and Chu Fengmian? She actually helped him to attack Alpha Hall? Although Alcade's Star Emperor was born after Alpha Hall, it was said that her relationship with Alpha Hall was extremely bad. Thousands of years ago, she directly betrayed Alpha Hall. It wasn't surprising that Alcade's Star Emperor came to attack the Tianjian sect. What the crowd couldn't understand was the relationship between Chu Fengmian and Alcade's Star Emperor. The era of the two figures was thousands of years apart. It was almost impossible for anyone to think that these two people were related. Only some old men who knew about Chu Fengmian's previous identity in the void and knew about what happened thousands of years ago could understand why Alcade's Star Emperor came with Chu Fengmian. While the crowd was discussing Chu Fengmian, Alcade's Star Emperor, and the ancient White Wolf had already arrived in the sky above Sky Sword City. Looking at the activated array above the Sky Sword City, Chu Fengmian sneered. It seems that you're ready. Since you're here, let's not talk nonsense. You guys, disperse the array of Sky Sword City and leave with the disciples. I can let you go this time. Otherwise, you'll die. Chu Fengmian looked at the figures in the sky above Sky Sword City and said coldly, "This Chu Fengmian is really here to attack Sky Sword City." Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, everyone present was shocked. They originally guessed that Chu Fengmian might just be here to threaten the Tianjian sect. But now, it seemed that Chu Fengmian was determined to attack the Tianjian sect this time. Chu Fengmian, the Tianjian sect isn't something that you can shake by yourself. Leave now. We don't want to be your enemy. In the sky above Sword City, an old man who was the leader of the Immortal Marquis slowly said. This old man was the sect master of the Cloud Sword sect, one of the largest sword sects under the Tianjian sect. He took a step forward and came in front of Chu Fengmian, facing him head-on. Whether or not I can shake it by myself, you can watch from the side. As for now, if you guys still want to defend Sky Sword City to the death, you'll be my enemy. Chu Fengmian's eyes were incomparably cold and murderous as he spoke. Either take your people and scram, or die. Everyone will be buried with the Tianjian sect. The ancient White Wolf could still maintain it for an hour. Chu Fengmian didn't want to waste time with these people. Chu Fengmian wanted to destroy the Tianjian sect. He couldn't be bothered to deal with these small sects that relied on the Tianjian sect. However, if they didn't know what was good for them, Chu Fengmian couldn't be blamed for not showing mercy. First, set a small target. For example, 1 second. Remember, Book House. Chapter 2285. Kid, don't go too far. Hearing Chu Fengmian's murderous words, Sect Master Yunjian's face turned ugly. Kid, let's see how you're going to attack Sky Sword City today. Another Immortal Marquis, the Spiritual Light Sword Emperor, snorted. Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. Chu Fengmian snorted coldly and didn't waste his breath. He immediately took action. With a dragon roar, the shadow of primogenitor Tianlong appeared behind Chu Fengmian. Above Chu Fengmian's head, 6 gigantic claws of the war dragon formed and blasted towards Sect Master Yunjian. How dare you be so arrogant by yourself? Set up the formation. Sect Master Yunjian snorted coldly. Immediately, the other sword cultivators gathered towards him. From the palm of Sect Master Yunjian, a gigantic formation suddenly soared into the sky. It was a gigantic formation that contained the power of yin and yang. All the sword cultivators stepped into the formation and became the eye of the formation. The gigantic yin-yang formation rushed towards the 6 claws of the war dragon. The yin-yang dual polarity formation, the strongest sword formation of the yin-yang sword sect, was actually obtained by Sect Master Yunjian? The moment they saw the yin-yang formation, some of the spectators couldn't help but exclaim in shock. This yin-yang dual polarity formation is said to be able to withstand the attack of an immortal monarch expert at its peak. So terrifying? Some of the martial artists exclaimed. A formation that could withstand the attack of an immortal monarch expert wasn't inferior to the defensive formation of the 7 major sections. But this seems to be an incomplete formation? Suddenly, someone noticed that a crack had appeared in the huge array diagram that had risen up. It seemed that this wasn't a complete formation, and there were still some flaws. Although this formation is incomplete, it still contains at least 10 to 20% of its power. Even if 2 or 3 immortal kings join forces, they might not be able to break it. An old man seemed to have some understanding of the yin-yang dual polarity formation, and said, "Even if it's incomplete, it still has such power. This person is going to suffer a great loss this time." Hearing this, many people couldn't help but think. When Sect Master Cloudward heard the discussions of the surrounding people, his face revealed a somewhat pleased expression. This yin-yang twin extremes formation was something he had obtained by chance. He had never used it before. It was his greatest trump card. Just this yin-yang twin extremes formation alone was enough to match 2 or 3 immortal kings. He stared at Chu Fengmian and said with a cold smile, "Brat, I'd like to see how you're going to break the formation today." "Really? Yin and Yang twin extremes formation? If it was in perfect condition, it would have been able to resist me for a while. However, it's just a broken formation. Break for me." Chu Fengmian suddenly burst out laughing. 6 war dragon claws burst out from Chu Fengmian's head and slammed down on the yin-yang dual extreme formation. The 6 battle dragon claws were black and white in color, containing the Tao of yin and yang, as they slammed downward. Boom! The heavens fell and the earth cracked. The moment the 6 war dragon claws came crashing down, the entire yin-yang dual extreme array was shattered into pieces with a loud bang. Even the formation diagram of the broken formation was shattered and turned into ashes. Under the 6 war dragon claws, everything was destroyed. How is this possible? As the yin-yang dual extreme formation was shattered, Sect Master Cloudsword's body was also sent flying into the distance. In his eyes there was an incomparably shocked expression. His greatest reliance, the yin-yang dual extreme formation that was comparable to 2 or 3 immortal kings, was actually so vulnerable in front of Chu Fengmian. Die. Chu Fengmian was too lazy to pay attention to Sect Master Cloudward. Another war dragon claw condensed in the air and swept down. Under this claw, Sect Master Cloudsword, Sword Emperor Lingguang, all the immortal generals and celestial realm warriors under their command were all killed on the spot. Their bodies were blown up on the spot and turned into a bloody mist that filled the sky. Since these people had chosen to stand with the Tianjian sect, their deaths were destined. Against his enemies, Chu Fengmian would not show mercy. This Sect Master Cloudsword, Sword Emperor Lingguang, and dozens of celestial realm experts all died like this? Looking at the shattered formation in the air and the bloody mist that filled the sky, many people rubbed their eyes. They could not believe what had happened in front of them. There were dozens of celestial realm experts, dozens of immortal generals, and 2 immortal marquee experts. When such a force gathered together, it could be regarded as a huge force even in the current 9 regions. But now, in front of Chu Fengmian, they were actually unable to withstand a single blow. Under a single claw, they were all killed. Even the yin-yang dual extreme formation, which was said to be comparable to 2 or 3 immortal kings, was directly destroyed by Chu Fengmian's claw. Is this person's strength beyond the immortal kings? Shocked gazes were all looking at Chu Fengmian. They could not imagine Chu Fengmian's current strength. To be able to destroy the yin-yang dual extreme formation with a single blow and destroy it head-on, Chu Fengmian's strength was definitely far beyond the level of an ordinary immortal king. Looking at Chu Fengmian's figure, they were all stunned for a moment. Some of them could not imagine how a half-step celestial realm expert could have such heaven-defying strength. Only some demon immortals who were in the depths of the void and witnessed Chu Fengmian defeating Raging Flame Sword Emperor with their own eyes were not surprised by this scene. Chu Fengmian was in existence who had defeated Raging Flame Sword Emperor head-on. Raging Flame Sword Emperor's strength was 10 times stronger than that of an ordinary Immortal King expert. Chu Fengmian could even defeat Raging Flame Sword Emperor. Of course, the yin-yang dual extreme formation could not resist Chu Fengmian. For a moment, the whole place was silent. Many of the warriors woke up from their daze when they smelled the smell of blood in the air. They knew that all of this was real. Those dozens of celestial realm and profound heaven realm experts were easily killed by Chu Fengmian just like that. Originally, in the hearts of many warriors, Chu Fengmian's attack on the Tianjian sect was simply an act of suicide. But now, after seeing Chu Fengmian's strength, stormy waves were set off in their hearts. With such strength, the Tianjian sect might not be able to resist Chu Fengmian. After all, Chu Fengmian did not come alone this time. Behind him, there were Alcade's Star Emperor and the ancient Desolation White Wolf. The aura emitted from their bodies was that of the Immortal King realm. In addition to Chu Fengmian, almost 3 Immortal Kings had joined forces to attack the Tianjian sect. Chapter 2286. The 9 regions are going to change. Some martial artists and fey immortals murmured to themselves. The 7 major sects rule over the 9 regions had never changed since 10,000 years ago. Even when the 9 regions changed drastically and countless experts from the extraterritorial starry sky came to the 9 regions, the 7 major sects rule over the 9 regions had never changed. But this time, Chu Fengmian's appearance was going to change the pattern. Although the rise of the 6 Paths Demon Gate had caused the 9 regions to become more chaotic, they had only taken over the 9 demon cities' position in the end. Chu Fengmian had not been affected. But today, Chu Fengmian was going to attack the Tianjian sect, which was completely different from the rise of the 6 Paths Demon Gate. The 6 Paths Demon Gate had no enmity with the 7 major sects. It could be said that his rise and the destruction of the 9 demons' city was tacitly acknowledged by the other 6 major sects. After the rise of the 6 Paths Demon Gate, it became one of the 7 major sects and was on equal footing with them. It was equivalent to taking over the 9 demons' city's position. But Chu Fengmian was different. Chu Fengmian was from the Sword Path sect and had a deep grudge with the 7 major sects. Chu Fengmian's attack on the Tianjian sect was just the beginning. Neither Chu Fengmian nor the 7 major sects would give up so easily. A bloody battle was bound to happen. With the current strength of Chu Fengmian and the other 2, even if the 7 major sects could kill them, it would be a Pyrrhic victory at most. At that time, the 7 major sects would not be able to maintain their current position. No matter who won or lost, this battle would determine the great change of the 9 regions. Devour. Chu Fengmian did not bother to pay attention to the martial artists and fey immortals. He took a step forward and activated the sky-devouring secret technique. A whirlpool that was 100 feet wide suddenly appeared in front of Chu Fengmian. The blood mist that filled the sky was completely devoured by this huge whirlpool. Although these people's blood essence was not of much use to Chu Fengmian, it was better than nothing. Chu Fengmian integrated them into his immortal true body and added power to the inscriptions in his immortal true body. After dealing with Sect Master Cloud Sword and the others, the Sky Sword City's great array was unimpeded. Are you trying to stall for time by activating the array? Chu Fengmian arrived in front of the Sky Sword City's great array, and a cold glint flashed across his eyes. Chu Fengmian had already arrived in front of the Heaven Sword City. It was impossible for the people of the Tianjian sect and the 7 major sects not to know of Chu Fengmian's arrival. However, right now, not a single expert from the 7 major sects had appeared. Chu Fengmian knew exactly what they were thinking. They were trying to stall for time. The ancient desolate white wolf was not a real desolate beast. It was just a manifestation. This was something the experts of the 7 large sects could tell. It was just a clone, so it couldn't be maintained for too long. Now, the Tianjian sect had activated the Grand Matrix, but all the cultivators had gone into hiding in order to buy time. They were using the Grand Matrix to buy time. Once the power of the primordial desolate white wolf's incarnation was exhausted, Chu Fengmian's side would lose a great help. Right now, all the experts of the Tianjian sect had gone into hiding. They had already made up their minds to stall for time. For the Tianjian sect, it didn't matter if the Heaven Sword City was destroyed. After all, the foundation of the Tianjian sect was in their own small world. The Heaven Sword City was just a city that communicated with the outside world. Even if it was destroyed, it could be rebuilt. You want to stall me with such a small array? Sword out. Chu Fengmian stood on top of the Heaven Sword City and looked at the Grand Matrix that enveloped it. Suddenly, the ancestral Dragon Supreme sword appeared in Chu Fengmian's hand and slashed down. Boom! The moment the sword was unsheathed, a shocking sword intent soared into the sky from behind Chu Fengmian. This sword intent covered the sky and split the sun. It was tens of thousands of feet tall, and it slashed down together with Chu Fengmian's sword. Rumble! As the sword fell, an explosion rang out. Then, under countless incredulous gazes, the Grand Matrix above the Heaven Sword City began to shatter, and cracks appeared. At the very least, this grand formation was set up by several immortal kings and a formation grandmaster. Chu Fengmian looked at the Grand Matrix of the Heaven Sword City and saw that it hadn't shattered. His eyes flashed with surprise. No wonder the Tianjian sect thought that they could use the Grand Matrix to stall Chu Fengmian. However, this time, Chu Fengmian didn't come alone. Alcade. Chu Fengmian looked behind him and saw the Alcade Star Emperor suddenly make a move. She pointed her finger, and the power of the stars gathered in her palm. The moment she pointed out, the power of the stars condensed into a sharp sword and pierced into the Grand Matrix. Boom! As the sword pierced into the Matrix, the Grand Matrix above the Heaven Sword City collapsed. Run! Run quickly! In the Heaven Sword City, many disciples of the Sword sect fled outside when they saw the Grand Matrix shatter. Their sect's ancestors had died in Chu Fengmian's hands, and they didn't want to be buried with the Tianjian sect. In an instant, almost all the warriors and demon gods in the Heaven Sword City had fled. The Heaven Sword City, one of the largest and most prosperous cities in the 9 regions, had now become an empty city. Chu Fengmian didn't bother to pay attention to these warriors and demon gods who had fled. What he really wanted to deal with were the patriarchs of the Tianjian sect. As for these disciples, Chu Fengmian didn't care about them. With the Grand Matrix broken, Chu Fengmian took a step forward, followed by the Alcade Star Emperor and the ancient White Wolf, and stepped into the Heaven Sword City. In his previous life, Chu Fengmian had also come to the Heaven Sword City. After 10,000 years of development, the current Heaven Sword City was much more prosperous than 10,000 years ago. But now, the Heaven Sword City was in ruins. With the collapse of the Grand Matrix, some of the aftershocks entered the Heaven Sword City and blasted the buildings into ruins. Chu Fengmian ignored the surroundings and directly came to the center of the Heaven Sword City. In the center of the Heaven Sword City there was a huge bronze door, but there seemed to be white bones inside the door. It was a bronze door made of white bone immortal copper. The moment one approached the bronze door, one could clearly feel the sword power contained within it. This bronze door was the entrance to the Tianjian sect's small world, and the door to the small world behind it. Now, the bronze door was covered with countless restrictions, and all of them had been activated. If some warriors even slightly approached it, they would be shattered into pieces. The Sword Bone Door. Rumor has it that the sword bones of the Tianjian sect's ancestors were refined into an immortal artifact door. some warriors couldn't help but say when they saw the bronze door. Chapter 2287. The Sword Bone Gate. Chu Fengmian arrived in front of the bronze gate and sized it up. The Sword Bone Gate was the most famous immortal artifact in the Tianjian sect. It was an immortal artifact forged from the sword bones of the Tianjian sect's patriarchs and immortal copper. It contained the sword intent and sword might of the Tianjian sect's patriarchs. It was comparable to the sect guarding immortal artifacts of the 7 major sects. Once a sword cultivator's cultivation reached an extremely high level, their sword intent would be carved into their bones. Even if they died, their bones would still contain shocking sword might. This kind of bone was called the sword bone. The sword bone gate was a gate forged from the sword bones of the Tianjian sect's patriarchs. It used the power of the patriarchs to protect the Tianjian sect's gate. This person doesn't just want to attack Sky Sword City. His goal is the Tianjian sect. Seeing Chu Fengmian step into the gate, a warrior couldn't help but exclaim. Attacking the Heaven Sword City was something that no one had done in the past 10,000 years. But now, it seemed that Chu Fengmian didn't just want to stop there. His goal was to truly attack the Tianjian sect, to attack the Tianjian sect's world of sects. It could be said that this was the first time that someone had attacked the Tianjian sect's world of sects since the Tianjian sect's appearance. I wonder if this person will succeed. Many of the spectating warriors and Fey immortals were waiting for this earth-shattering battle. Ever since the Tianjian sect had appeared and become one of the 7 major sects of the 9 regions, no one had attacked the Tianjian sect's world of sects and broken the Sword Bone Gate. They all wanted to see if Chu Fengmian could break the Sword Bone Gate. It's about to begin. Seeing Chu Fengmian walk step by step toward the Sword Bone Gate, everyone held their breaths and stared in his direction. They didn't want to move their eyes away for even a moment. Gong Yangxian, get out here and accept your death. However, Chu Fengmian didn't attack directly. Instead, he looked at the Sword Bone Gate and shouted coldly. This voice could be clearly heard in the entire Heaven Sword City, and even in a radius of 1,000 miles. Chu Fengmian's words were filled with boundless killing intent. Anyone who heard it would shudder in fear. Gong Yangxian. Who is Gong Yangxian? Many people were at a loss when they heard Chu Fengmian call out this name. This name was unfamiliar to most people. They had never heard of it before. Gong Yangxian, that's the name of the former leader of the Tianjian sect. The former leader of the Tianjian sect from 10,000 years ago. Only a few old men were shocked when they heard this name, and they couldn't help but ask. Gong Yangxian was an invincible expert 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago, he stood at the peak of the 9 regions, the old leader of the Tianjian sect. Just as everyone was still discussing, a voice suddenly resounded. Countless eyes looked in the direction of the Sword Bone Gate. The voice came from the Sword Bone Gate, and a cold snort sounded from within. This voice, it's Gong Yangxian, the former leader of the Tianjian sect. He actually came out. This voice was filled with boundless majesty, looking down on everything in the world. Chu Jianbai, I didn't expect you to still be alive. It seems that the master of the sword Dao has some tricks up his sleeves. He actually allowed you to live from 10,000 years ago, and now you can even cultivate and possess such power. Gong Yangshuan's voice sounded. Everyone could vaguely see that behind the Sword Bone Gate, there seemed to be an old man standing on the other side of the gate. This figure was Gong Yangxian. He stood there like an unsheathed sharp sword, containing boundless sharpness. Ordinary people would feel a piercing pain in their eyes when they looked at him. The sword edge that was constantly emitted proved that his swordsmanship had reached an extreme level of mastery. The Tianjian sect already knew that Chu Fengmian had killed Ying Qianzhua and Raging Flame Sword Emperor. At the same time, Gong Yangxian also knew Chu Fengmian's identity. He called Chu Fengmian Chu Jianbai. Chu Jianbai? Who's that? Many people were at a loss when they heard Gong Yangshuan's name. Even some of the celestial realm powerhouses showed a somewhat bewildered look. This is the Sword Dao genius of the Sword Dao sect from 10,000 years ago. Only some elders of the 9 regions knew this name. They looked at Chu Fengmian in disbelief. So that's how it is. Chu Fengmian is Chu Jianbai, the Sword Dao genius from 10,000 years ago. Chu Fengmian? Chu Jianbai? The moment they heard this explanation, even more warriors became even more confused. They really couldn't compare Chu Fengmian with the Sword Dao genius from 10,000 years ago. Chu Jianbai? It's actually him. Wasn't this person born without a spiritual pulse and unable to cultivate? Moreover, Chu Fengmian's real age should be no more than 100 years old. Many elders of the 9 regions stared at Chu Fengmian. Although a warrior's age couldn't be judged by his appearance, they could still judge his general age. Chu Fengmian was definitely less than 100 years old. It was very difficult to match him with a Sword Dao genius from 10,000 years ago. Especially Chu Jianbai. Although he was a famous Sword Dao genius, he was most famous for his naturally terminated meridians. He didn't have any spiritual pulse. Even sacred elixirs and immortal elixirs couldn't make a warrior with naturally terminated meridians possess a spiritual pulse. These sacred elixirs and immortal elixirs were enough to make some ordinary people reach the heavens in a single step and become a genius of a generation. However, they were useless on Chu Fengmian. A person with naturally terminated meridians suddenly appeared 10,000 years later and even possessed a spiritual pulse. This made people unable to react for a moment. The Sword Dao Master's means are indeed heavenly. He can even heal naturally terminated meridians. Someone couldn't help but say, only the Lord of the Sword Dao could possibly have healed Chu Fengmian's innately crippled meridians. Furthermore, Chu Fengmian had been in hiding for tens of thousands of years, only to suddenly appear out of nowhere. However, only Chu Fengmian himself knew that the Sword Dao Master had nothing to do with his naturally terminated meridians being cured. He was only able to do so after his rebirth. Naturally terminated meridians were abandoned by heaven and earth. Even sacred elixirs and immortal elixirs couldn't cure them. Chu Fengmian didn't refute the crowd's guess. The biggest secret about him was that he had been reborn as a second person. This was the biggest secret since ancient times, a secret that even immortal emperors couldn't understand. Chu Fengmian didn't want this matter to be exposed. Now that everyone was guessing, Chu Fengmian was happy to let them think of the Sword Dao Master. Chapter 2288. Gong Yangxian, you came out. Are you prepared to die? Chu Fengmian's expression was indifferent as he looked in the direction of the Sword Bone Gate. His words were extremely arrogant. Many people had already seen Chu Fengmian's arrogance, but when they heard Chu Fengmian's words, they were still stunned. As soon as he opened his mouth, he asked one of the strongest people in the Tianjin sect, Gong Yangxian, to come out and die. Even the supreme giants of the 7 major sects didn't dare to say such words. The moment Chu Fengmian spoke, waves of killing intent erupted from the sword bone door and soared into the sky. This murderous intent came from the various patriarchs of the Tianjin sect. Gong Yangxian was the former sect master of the Tianjin sect. Now, Chu Fengmian's words were not only looking down on Gong Yangxian, but also the entire Tianjin sect. The patriarchs of the Tianjin sect were now extremely angry. They couldn't wait to attack and kill Chu Fengmian. Boy, don't be so arrogant. You're just relying on the ancient White Wolf and the Alcade Star Emperor. The ancient White Wolf is just an incarnation. Can only last for half an hour at most. Why should I attack you? Gong Yangshuan's voice sounded again. Hearing Chu Fengmian's arrogant words, he didn't sound angry. Instead, he smiled. After half an hour, you'll lose the incarnation of the ancient White Wolf. Won't it be easy for me to kill and capture you then? This Gong Yangxian is indeed the former sect master of the Tianjian sect. He's so calm. If he's not calm, how can he be the sect master of the Tianjian sect? Leading the Tianjian sect to besiege the Sword Dao sect and achieve hegemony? Seeing Chu Fengmian walking step by step towards the Sword Bone Gate, everyone present held their breath and stared in Chu Fengmian's direction. They didn't want to move their eyes away for a moment. Gong Yangxian, come out and die. However, Chu Fengmian didn't attack directly. Instead, he looked at the Sword Bone Gate and suddenly shouted. This voice could be clearly heard in the entire Heaven Sword City, and even in a radius of 1,000 miles. Chu Fengmian's words were filled with boundless killing intent. Anyone who heard it would shudder in fear. Gong Yangxian? Who? Who is Gong Yangxian? Many people were at a loss when they heard Chu Fengmian call out this name. This name was unfamiliar to most people. They had never heard of it before. Gong Yangxian, that's the name of the former leader of the Tianjian sect. The former leader of the Tianjian sect from 10,000 years ago. Only a few old men were shocked when they heard this name. They couldn't help but ask. Gong Yangxian was an invincible expert 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago, he stood at the peak of the 9 regions, the old leader of the Tianjian sect. Just as everyone was still discussing, a voice suddenly resounded. Humph. Countless eyes looked in the direction of the Sword Bone Gate. The voice came from the Sword Bone Gate, and a cold snort sounded from within. This voice, it's Gong Yangxian, the former leader of the Tianjian sect. He actually came out. This voice was filled with boundless majesty that looked down on everything in the world. Chu Jianbai, I didn't expect you to still be alive. It seems that the master of the Sword Dao has some tricks up his sleeve. He actually allowed you to live from 10,000 years ago. Now you can even cultivate and possess such power. Gong Yangshuan's voice sounded. Everyone could vaguely see that behind the Sword Bone Gate, there seemed to be the figure of an old man standing on the other side of the gate. This figure was Gong Yangxian. He stood there like an unsheathed sharp sword that contained boundless sharpness. Ordinary people would feel a piercing pain in their eyes when they looked at him. The sword edge that was constantly emitted proved that his swordsmanship had reached an extreme level of mastery. The Tianjian sect already knew that Chu Fengmian had killed Ying Qianzhua and Raging Flame Sword Emperor. At the same time, Gong Yangxian also knew Chu Fengmian's identity. He addressed Chu Fengmian as Chu Jianbai. Chu Jianbai? Who's that? Many people were at a loss when they heard Gong Yangxian address him. Even some of the celestial realm powerhouses showed a somewhat bewildered look. This is the Sword Dao genius of the Sword Dao sect from 10,000 years ago. Only some elders of the 9 regions knew this name. They looked at Chu Fengmian in disbelief. I see. Chu Fengmian is Chu Jianbai, the Sword Dao genius from 10,000 years ago. Chu Fengmian? Chu Jianbai? The moment they heard this explanation, more warriors became even more at a loss. They really couldn't compare Chu Fengmian with the Sword Dao genius from 10,000 years ago. Chu Jianbai? It's actually him. Wasn't this person born without a spiritual pulse and unable to cultivate? Moreover, Chu Fengmian's real age should be no more than 100 years old. Many elders of the 9 regions stared at Chu Fengmian. Although a warrior's age couldn't be judged by his appearance, they could still judge his general age. Chu Fengmian was definitely less than 100 years old. It was very difficult to match him with a Sword Dao genius from 10,000 years ago. Especially Chu Jianbai. Although he was a famous Sword Dao genius, he was most famous for his naturally terminated meridians. He didn't have any spiritual pulse. Even Saint Pills and Immortal Pills couldn't make a warrior with naturally terminated meridians possess a spiritual pulse. These Saint Pills and Immortal Pills were enough to make some ordinary people reach the heavens in a single step and become a genius of a generation. However, they were useless on Chu Fengmian. A person with naturally terminated meridians suddenly appeared 10,000 years later and even possessed a spiritual pulse. This made people unable to react for a moment. The master of the sword Tao is indeed heaven-defying. He can even heal naturally terminated meridians. Someone couldn't help but say. To them, only the master of the sword Tao could have healed Chu Fengmian's naturally terminated meridians and made Chu Fengmian hide for 10,000 years before reappearing. However, only Chu Fengmian himself knew that his naturally terminated meridians had nothing to do with the master of the sword Tao. He was only able to resolve his naturally terminated meridians after his rebirth. Naturally terminated meridians were abandoned by heaven and earth. Even saint pills and immortal pills couldn't cure them. Everyone guessed so, and Chu Fengmian didn't refute. The biggest secret about him was that he had been reborn as a second person. This was the biggest secret since ancient times. Even immortals couldn't understand this mystery. Chu Fengmian didn't want this matter to be exposed. Now that everyone guessed so, Chu Fengmian was happy to let them think of the master of the sword Tao. Chapter 2289. Phantom Sword Technique. Celestial Sword Technique. These were the most powerful sword techniques in the Tianjian sect. Seeing the thousands of sword techniques unleashed by the 7 sword will incarnations, many warriors not far away exclaimed in amazement. These people were all sword masters of the Tianjian sect when they were alive. Some were even at the sect master level. What a powerful sword technique! Just the sword bones left behind have such heaven-defying power. It was almost equivalent to the power of 7 celestial kings. At this moment, the power had reached an unimaginable level. Even an expert at the peak of the celestial king realm might not be able to resist the combined power of the 7 sword will incarnations. He's too arrogant. Some warriors couldn't help but say. The combined power of the 7 sword will incarnations was even stronger than the combined power of 7 ordinary celestial kings. This was because the 7 sword intent incarnations' sword bones had been integrated into the sword bone gate. Now, their power was faintly fused into one. When the 7 sword intent incarnations attacked together, their power was combined. When the power of the 7 sword will incarnations gathered together, their power was extremely strong. The 2 sword edges collided in the air. A few sword will incarnations that have been dead for a long time want to compete with me? Destroy them. Chu Fengmian suddenly laughed. At the moment when the 2 sword edges collided, a terrifying sword will rose from behind Chu Fengmian. This sword will soared into the 9th heaven and shook the clouds away. Suddenly, the sword will shrouded the 7 sword will incarnations. Suddenly, their bodies trembled, and in the next moment, they suddenly broke into pieces. The moment Chu Fengmian's sword will shrouded them, the 7 sword will incarnations were firmly suppressed. They couldn't even condense their expressions and broke into pieces. At the same time, everyone noticed that the 7 sword bones on the sword bone gate were covered with countless cracks. Under the shroud of the sword will, they began to break into pieces. The 7 sword bones were all broken. What? They were all destroyed in one move! These sword will incarnations with strength comparable to celestial kings fell just like that? The sword bones are all broken. With a single move, all 7 sword bones were shattered. None of the people present had expected this sudden change. In their eyes, Chu Fengmian and the 7 sword intent incarnations were bound to have a great battle. But unexpectedly, all of this ended in the blink of an eye. Chu Fengmian's sword, which was condensed with his sword will, slashed down and killed all 7 sword will incarnations. Even the sword bones that carried their sword will had been shattered. They were dead beyond compare. Looking at Chu Fengmian in the air, many people's faces were filled with shock. Some even felt a chill in their hearts. These were 7 experts comparable to immortal kings. Although they were not living people, even if a real immortal king was here, he might not be able to win against any of them. But now, in front of Chu Fengmian, they were so weak that they couldn't even withstand a single blow. Even an expert at the peak of the immortal king realm might not be able to achieve this. Gong Yangxian, is this what you're relying on? After Chu Fengmian killed the 7 sword will incarnations, he took a step forward and walked towards the sword bone gate again. There was a hint of disdain on his face. After condensing the 3rd inscription, Chu Fengmian's strength had reached an unprecedented level. In terms of sword Dao, Chu Fengmian was not inferior to an expert at the immortal monarch realm. In terms of sword Dao and sword Dao, there were very few people who could be on equal footing with Chu Fengmian in the 3 great saint realms, or even the legendary 9 realms of heaven, let alone the 9 realms. His sword Dao had surpassed the immortal emperor's sword Dao and was aiming for the highest level. As for these sword will incarnations condensed from sword Dao, they were not worth mentioning in front of Chu Fengmian. Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, for a moment, no one in the sword bone gate made a sound. It seemed that even the experts of the Tianjian sect were stunned for a moment and couldn't even make a sound. These experts of the Tianjian sect had calculated everything. They planned to use the sword bone gate to delay Chu Fengmian. They knew that the sword bone gate couldn't stop Chu Fengmian and the others, but it was enough to consume their strength. However, they would never have thought that Chu Fengmian would be able to destroy the sword bone great gate's greatest trump card so easily with just a single move. These 7 sword bones were the source of power of the sword bone gate. Now, these 7 sword bones were all shattered by Chu Fengmian's sword. The sword bone gate was just an ordinary immortal artifact. How could it stop Chu Fengmian? The dignified old sect master of the Tianjian sect is actually planning to be a coward? Looking at the silence, Chu Fengmian's lips curled into a mocking smile. Since you don't want to come out, I'll drag all of you out. Rumble. The huge sword bone gate was shrouded by the sword intent. It trembled violently, and the countless restrictions on it began to shatter. The moment Chu Fengmian opened his mouth, a huge battle dragon claw suddenly condensed above his head. It rushed towards the sword bone gate and fiercely bombarded it. Boom! The moment the battle dragon claw landed on the sword bone door, the countless seals on the door were shattered. Huge cracks appeared on the door, and some of the corners even began to shatter. The sword bone gate's biggest source of power, the 7 sword bones, were all shattered. The remaining sword bone gate was just a shell. In front of Chu Fengmian, it wasn't worth mentioning. Boom, boom, boom. As the battle dragon claw's power was fully activated, more and more cracks appeared on the sword bone gate. Finally, under the power of a dragon's roar, the sword bone gate was shattered. The Tianjian sect's invincible gate, which had been guarding it for so long, was shattered just like that. Many martial artists and Yao gods who were watching couldn't believe their eyes. The Tianjian sect's strongest defense was broken just like that? All of this happened in the blink of an eye. From Chu Fengmian's attack to the destruction of the sword bone gate, only a moment had passed. In an instant, the Tianjian sect's most reliable defense was shattered just like that. Many people couldn't believe what they were seeing. The sword bone gate was shattered just like that? In particular, some of the martial artists from the 9 domains, and some of the sword cultivators who had escaped from the Sky Sword City, were stunned and speechless. In their eyes, the sword bone gate was an invincible defense, but now it couldn't even withstand a single blow. Chapter 2290. It's not that the sword bone gate is too weak, it's that this person is too strong. Some warriors couldn't help but comment upon hearing this. The sword bone gate was undoubtedly powerful. The sword bone gate could actually condense 7 sword will incarnations that were comparable to immortal kings. This kind of power was worthy of the Tianjian sect guarding immortal artifact. It should be known that 7 immortal kings could easily wipe out any force other than the 7 major sects. Now, the Sword Bone Gate was easily broken by Chu Fengmian. It wasn't that the Sword Bone Gate was too weak, but that Chu Fengmian was too strong. Chu Fengmian's strength was beyond everyone's expectations. The Sword Bone Gate has been broken. The Tianjian sect world is about to appear. Many people looked in the direction of the Sword Bone Gate. As the Sword Bone Gate was broken, an illusory area suddenly appeared in the center of the Sky Sword City, where the Sword Bone Gate used to be. In this illusory area there were countless mountains, palaces, and buildings. Many people could even see the many figures standing on top of these mountains. This is the Tianjian sect world. Countless eyes were fixed on the scene in the illusory area. This scene was the Tianjian sect world. As long as one walked into this illusory area, they would be able to enter the real Tianjian sect. The Tianjian sect world was no longer an ordinary small world. After tens of thousands of years, after being nurtured by generations of Tianjian sect experts, it was already tied to the Tianjian sect. Could be said that this small world was now a part of the Tianjian sect. When Chu Fengmian saw this illusory area, a cold smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He immediately walked over. Behind him, Alcade's Star Emperor and the ancient White Wolf followed closely behind him. The moment Chu Fengmian stepped into this illusory area, a cold shout suddenly sounded. Activate the Flying Immortal Heaven Array. The source of this voice was the Tianjian sect's old sect master, Gong Yangxian. As the former sect master of the Tianjian sect, his status was much higher than that of the new sect master. The remaining 3 sword masters and the various elders of the Tianjian sect all obeyed his orders. The moment Gong Yangxian spoke, the 3 sword masters, the various elders, the Grand Supreme Elders, and the geniuses cultivated by the Tianjian sect all drew their swords and conjured a huge array diagram. This was a complete formation diagram, completely different from the previous yin-yang twin extremes formation. One by one, the sword masters and supreme elders stepped into the array diagram and became the eye of the array. Flying Immortal Peaceful Heaven Formation. This is the Tianjian sect's protective array. It is said to be passed down from the 9 domains of heaven. What a terrifying power! At this moment, hundreds of Tianjian sect experts stepped into the array diagram and became the eye of the array. The power emitted from the array diagram was incomparably terrifying. It even contained the power to destroy the world. If all the power in this array diagram erupted, it could even destroy the entire central region or even the entire 9 regions. The real trump card of the Tianjian sect has appeared. That's the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor. Wasn't he rumored to have fallen 10,000 years ago? He's actually still alive? And the Jade Cloud Sword Emperor. These people are actually still alive. Many people saw that there were actually many incomparably ancient figures in the array diagram. Each of these people exuded an extremely terrifying power. Many of these people were old antiques who hadn't walked in the 9 regions for 10,000 years, or even tens of thousands of years. Many of these people were rumored to have fallen. Yet they were all still alive. The foundation of the Tianjian sect is unfathomable. An old man couldn't help but exclaim. Within the entire Sky Sword sect, there were a total of 10 immortal kings. A total of 10 immortal kings. And this was after Ying Qianzhua, the Raging Flame Sword Emperor, had been killed by Chu Fengmian. Otherwise, there would be 12 celestial kings in the Tianjian sect. What a terrifying foundation! The 7 sects of the 9 regions are indeed behemoths who have ruled the 9 regions for 10,000 years. This foundation is indeed unshakable. Seeing the terrifying power displayed by the Tianjian sect, everyone clearly understood why the 7 sects' position in the 9 regions was unshakable. 10 celestial kings, and 3 of them are at the peak of the celestial king realm. Chu Fengmian also looked over. The strength displayed by the Tianjian sect was also within Chu Fengmian's expectations. Chu Fengmian had long been aware of the Tianjian sect's strength. During the siege of the Sword Dao sect, the Tianjian sect had erupted with such a powerful force. Therefore, Chu Fengmian had always hidden his strength to avoid being targeted by the Tianjian sect. Now, the 7 sword bones had been shattered by Chu Fengmian's sword. The remaining sword bone gate was just an ordinary celestial artifact. How could it stop Chu Fengmian? The dignified old sect master of the Tianjian sect is actually planning to be a coward? Seeing the silence, Chu Fengmian's lips curled into a mocking smile. Since you don't want to come out, then I'll drag all of you out. Rumble! The huge sword bone gate was enveloped by the sword intent. It trembled violently, and the countless restrictions on it began to shatter. The moment Chu Fengmian spoke, a huge war dragon claw suddenly condensed above his head. It rushed towards the sword bone gate and fiercely bombarded it. Boom! The moment the war dragon claw bombarded the sword bone gate, the countless restrictions on the gate were shattered. Huge cracks appeared on the gate, and some of the edges even began to shatter. The 7 sword bones, the source of the gate's power, had all been shattered. The remaining sword bone gate was just a shell. It was not worth mentioning in front of Chu Fengmian. Boom! 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 As the power of the war dragon claw was fully activated, more and more cracks appeared on the sword bone gate. Finally, under the explosive power of the dragon's roar, the sword bone gate was shattered. The invincible gate that had always protected the Tianjian sect was shattered just like that. For a moment, many of the warriors and demon gods who were watching could not believe their eyes. How could the Tianjian sect's strongest defense be broken just like that? All of this happened in the blink of an eye. From Chu Fengmian's attack to the shattering of the sword bone gate, only a moment had passed. In an instant, the Tianjian sect's most reliable defense was shattered just like that. Many people could not believe what they were seeing with their own eyes. The sword bone gate was shattered just like that? In particular, some of the warriors of the 9 domains, and some of the sword cultivators who had escaped from the Sky Sword City, were in a daze. They were speechless. In their eyes, the sword bone gate was supposed to be an invincible defense. But now it could not even withstand a single blow. First, set a small target. For example, 1 second. Remember, book guest residence. Chapter 2291. What a strong power! The scorching sun sword emperor took a step forward. Everyone felt that he was like a giant beast that suddenly walked out. The power contained in his body made everyone feel suffocated. Some of the weaker warriors and demon gods didn't dare to stand in front of the scorching sun sword emperor. The scorching sun sword emperor cultivated the pure yang sword Dao and had an extremely fiery temper. Although the scorching sun sword emperor's life force was weak, he was still an invincible old peak immortal king. The moment he spoke, the scorching sun sword emperor suddenly walked out of the flying immortal peaceful heaven array. Suddenly, he struck out with his sword. This sword was unsheathed, and it was so fast that no one could see it clearly. In the blink of an eye, this sword turned into a sea of fire that enveloped Chu Fengmian. In an instant, the entire Sky Sword City turned into a sea of fire. Under the power of this sword, the entire Sky Sword City was about to be turned into ruins. The scorching sun sword emperor is indeed someone who has lived for tens of thousands of years. This person's power is already unbelievably strong. Just his strength alone is close to that of an immortal monarch. It's a pity that he's too old and no longer has the drive. Otherwise, he would have already stepped into the immortal monarch realm. An old man looked in the direction of the scorching sun sword emperor and said slowly. The scorching sun sword emperor had already gone into seclusion 20,000 years ago, preparing to break through to the immortal monarch realm. Now, it seemed that the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor's plan had failed. With his current life force, it was almost impossible for him to advance further in his realm. However, this 20,000 years of seclusion was also because the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor's current strength was unbelievably strong. It was almost stronger than the Raging Sun Sword Emperor that Chu Fengmian had seen before. Be careful. Alcade Stardew could not help but remind him. She could also clearly feel the power of the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor. It's fine. He's just an old man who doesn't have many days left to live. How dare he come to stand up for the Tianjin sect? Chu Fengmian was in the center of the illusory area. Seeing the sea of fire enveloping him, his expression didn't change at all. He just slashed out with his sword. Buzz! Chu Fengmian's sword let out a long cry, and a dazzling sword light burst out from the tip of his sword, rushing straight toward the sea of fire. Wherever the sword passed, the surrounding flames were completely extinguished. The sea of fire that filled the sky was completely extinguished by this sword strike. In the entire Heaven Sword City, not a single flame could be seen. It was as if the sea of fire that had enveloped the Heaven Sword City was just an illusion. However, when many people saw the traces left behind by the sea of fire in the Sky Sword City, they all knew in their hearts that sea of flames was not an illusion. Instead, it truly existed. Merely, it was completely extinguished by Chu Fengmian's sword. Old thing, is that all you've got? Chu Fengmian did all this effortlessly. He looked at the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor and sneered. Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor's face became even more furious. His white hair stood on end. Little bastard, don't be so arrogant. As he spoke, a red spiritual sword suddenly appeared in the palm of the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor's hand. The moment this spiritual sword was unsheathed, the cry of a phoenix resounded. Everyone could vaguely see the shadow of a phoenix revolving around this spiritual sword. Fire Phoenix Immortal Sword. This is one of the 3 great immortal swords of the Tianjin sect. Rumor has it that this immortal sword was forged with the immortal smelting divine iron and the blood essence of the divine beast Fire Phoenix. It is said that this immortal sword came from the 9 domains of heaven. Isn't this the legendary immortal sword? It actually exists? Seeing the spiritual sword that the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor took out, many people were extremely surprised. The 3 great immortal swords of the Tianjin sect could be said to be famous in the 9 domains. Even some warriors who had just started cultivating had heard of the 3 great immortal swords of the Tianjin sect. However, in the 9 domains, most people only thought that the 3 great immortal swords were legends. They had never thought that the 3 great immortal swords were actually real. The shadow of the Fire Phoenix was enough to prove the identity of this immortal sword. The moment the Fire Phoenix immortal sword was unsheathed, the aura of the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor increased by several times. Vaguely, it seemed that he had broken the limit of the Immortal King realm and stepped into the Immortal Duke realm. The Fire Phoenix immortal sword was one of the 3 great immortal swords of the Tianjin sect. Moreover, it was infused with the blood essence of the Fire Phoenix and contained the power of the Fire Phoenix. The Fire Phoenix was the strongest divine beast in the world. The Scorching Sun Sword Emperor cultivated fire elemental swordsmanship. Together with the Fire Phoenix immortal sword, they complemented each other. No wonder Gong Yangxian dared to let you out. It turns out that you have such a trump card. The Fire Phoenix immortal sword is not bad. Chu Fengmian could not help but praise the Fire Phoenix immortal sword when he saw it. The Fire Phoenix immortal sword was indeed one of the most powerful immortal swords that Chu Fengmian had ever seen. It could be said to be one of the strongest immortal weapons below the extreme immortal weapons. However, no matter how strong the Fire Phoenix immortal sword is, it won't be able to unleash its power in your hands. Chu Fengmian's lips curled into a contemptuous smile. You're courting death. The scorching sun sword emperor roared angrily. With the fire phoenix immortal sword in his hand, he slashed at Chu Fengmian's head with boundless sword power. He wielded the fire phoenix immortal sword to kill Chu Fengmian directly. Phoenix cries resounded as the fire phoenixes around the fire phoenix immortal sword entered the blade of the sword. The power of this sword was almost the strongest sword technique that the scorching sun sword emperor had created in his lifetime of comprehension of the sword Tao. It's your honor to die under this sword technique. The moment the blazing sun sword emperor drew his sword, a ferocious look appeared on his aged face. The strongest sword technique? You've only created this sword technique after living for 50,000 years? No wonder you've never been able to step into the immortal monarch realm. Chu Fengmian only glanced at him briefly before a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. I'll show you what the strongest sword technique is. 9 regions. Sky splitting. Boom. 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 Suddenly, Chu Fengmian held the spiritual sword tightly and slashed out. Countless divine lights erupted from the blade of the sword. These divine lights were none other than the sword intent that belonged to Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian's sword intent was so strong that it could take form the moment it erupted. The sword intent that he left behind would remain immortal for 10,000 years even if Chu Fengmian fell in the future. The sword intent that surpassed the immortal emperor's sword Tao permeated the entire Sky Sword City at this moment. For a moment, even the celestial realm experts were a little absent-minded. Their eyes were filled with fear. No one could withstand the sharpness of this sword. Boom! When the two swords collided, there was no longer any suspense in the outcome. Chapter 2292. The powerful and boundless sword intent slashed towards the blazing sun sword emperor. Even the blazing phoenix immortal sword in his hand was trembling and wailing in front of the sword intent. Sky-splitting sword. Even the blazing phoenix immortal sword could not withstand the sharpness of the sword. Neither the blazing sun sword emperor's sword intent nor the blazing phoenix immortal sword could withstand the sharpness of the sky-splitting sword. PFFF. The blazing sun sword emperor was forced to retreat as he spat out blood essence. His already weak vitality was severely injured and his face turned pale. Die! Chu Fengmian looked coldly at the blazing sun sword emperor. With a thought, a huge dragon claw slashed down towards the blazing sun sword emperor. Little bastard, how dare you! Many of the Tianjian sect's experts in the flying immortal peaceful sky array roared furiously. Why wouldn't I dare? Chu Fengmian sneered. The battle dragon claw was extremely fast as it slashed towards the blazing sun sword emperor. The blazing sun sword emperor was already severely injured by the sky-splitting sword. Now, it was even more difficult for him to withstand the battle dragon claw. Flying immortal. At this moment, a divine radiance suddenly descended from the sky. A vague figure could be vaguely seen within the divine radiance. This vague figure was holding a long sword and slashing towards Chu Fengmian. This vague figure came from the array eye of the flying immortal peaceful sky array. The strongest expert in the flying immortal peaceful sky array, the old sect master of the Tianjian sect, suddenly made his move. He could not sit idly by and watch Chu Fengmian kill the blazing sun sword emperor. He had also heard that Chu Fengmian had cultivated a cultivation technique that allowed him to devour the blood essence of others to increase his strength. Once Chu Fengmian killed the scorching sun sword emperor, Chu Fengmian's strength would increase to another level, and he would be even more unstoppable. Save the blazing sun. The moment Gong Yangxian made his move, he roared at the flying immortal peaceful sky array. All the experts of the Sky Sword sect in the flying immortal peaceful heavenly formation gathered their power and formed a giant hand, which suddenly grabbed at the scorching sun sword emperor. They were trying to pull the blazing sun sword emperor into the protection of the flying immortal peaceful sky array. Trying to save him? Alcade, ancient, desolate, white wolf. Chu Fengmian roared as he saw this. The Alcade Star Monarch and the ancient desolation White Wolf suddenly made their moves and rushed towards the flying immortal peaceful heavenly formation. The ancient desolation White Wolf immediately transformed into its original form, which was over 10,000 feet long, and slashed out with its huge claws. The giant hand that extended from the flying immortal peaceful heavenly formation was instantly destroyed. In the next moment, the Alcade Star Emperor and the ancient desolation White Wolf dashed into the flying immortal peaceful heavenly formation. In an instant, countless forces collided within the flying immortal peaceful heavenly formation. Of the immortal array immortal realm. Sky King the desolate immortal emperor and desolate king emperor was. The flying immortal peaceful sky array's strength was less than half of its peak after losing Gong Yangxian. It was already difficult to deal with the attacks of two peak immortal kings. Damn it! An anxious look appeared on Gong Yangshuan's face. He had allowed the Blazing Sun Sword Emperor to attack because he wanted to test Chu Fengmian's strength. In his opinion, the Blazing Sun Sword Emperor was a peak immortal king expert. Even if he couldn't defeat Chu Fengmian, he should be able to escape unscathed. Moreover, the Blazing Sun Sword Emperor had the Fire Phoenix Immortal Sword as his trump card. He didn't expect the Blazing Sun Sword Emperor to be so vulnerable in front of Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian had killed many experts from the seven sects in the depths of the void. After devouring their blood essence and condensing it into inscriptions, Chu Fengmian's strength was completely different from before. Gong Yangxian suddenly attacked. His sword slashed towards Chu Fengmian. This slash seemed to be supported by the power of heaven and earth. Countless sword shadows appeared in the sky and slashed towards Chu Fengmian. Celestial Sword Technique. It was the strongest sword technique of the Tianjian sect. When Gong Yangxian used it, it was many times stronger than when Xian Songtian used it. Every sword shadow was comparable to the peak attack of an immortal king expert. There were hundreds and thousands of sword intents in the sky. The moment he used the celestial sword technique, Gong Yangxian suddenly rushed towards the Blazing Sun Sword Emperor. He grabbed the Blazing Sun Sword Emperor and flew towards the celestial array of heaven. Since you've come out, there's no need to go back. Chu Fengmian had already guessed Gong Yangshuan's actions. Gong Yangxian was cautious by nature and would never give up on the array formation to fight one-on-one with Chu Fengmian. He suddenly made a move just to save the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor. However, Chu Fengmian was already prepared. Supreme Sword Array. Just as Gong Yangxian was approaching the Blazing Sun Sword Emperor, rays of golden sword light suddenly appeared beside the Blazing Sun Sword Emperor. These rays of golden sword light flew out one after another. There were thousands of them. They were the 2,815 Supreme Sword Qi in Chu Fengmian's hands. The 2,815 Supreme Sword Qi suddenly flew out and formed a sword array. The number one killing array in the world, Supreme Sword Array. Gong Yangxian and the Blazing Sun Sword Emperor were instantly trapped in the Supreme Sword Array. Supreme Sword Array. This is a Supreme Sword Array formed by Supreme Sword Qi. More than 2,000 Supreme Sword Qi. This person actually managed to gather so many Supreme Sword Qi by himself? Seeing the sudden change in the situation, Gong Yangxian, the Blazing Sun Sword Emperor and many others revealed looks of disbelief. Supreme Sword Qi was the ultimate treasure of Sword Dao. It could be said that it was extremely attractive to any sword cultivator. Because of this, it was almost impossible to find a large amount of Supreme Sword Qi. However, Chu Fengmian relied on his opportunity to obtain 90% of the Supreme Sword Qi. This was something that no one had ever done since the destruction of the Upper Sword sect. Damn it! Gong Yangshuan's face was extremely gloomy. Unlike the others, he also knew that Chu Fengmian had a large amount of supreme sword qi. Therefore, he had been very careful before. He was afraid that he would be trapped in the supreme sword array. After all, Chu Fengmian now controlled 90% of the supreme sword qi. Although the supreme sword array he set up was complete and could pose a great threat to any immortal king. Chu Fengmian's strength alone was comparable to a peak immortal king, an expert who was close to the immortal monarch realm. If there was a supreme sword array, even Gong Yangxian would find it difficult to deal with it. Therefore, he only wanted to delay Chu Fengmian, save the blazing sun sword emperor, and return to the flying immortal titan heaven array. However, he did not expect that Chu Fengmian had already guessed all of this. He deliberately did not kill the blazing sun sword emperor directly, but secretly set up the supreme sword qi around the blazing sun sword emperor. Chapter 2293. Chu Fengmian had been waiting for this moment. Supreme Sword Qi was the supreme sword treasure of the Shang Sword sect. Chu Fengmian had obtained the Shang Sword sect's inheritance, which also mentioned some methods to control the supreme sword qi. After learning these methods, his control over the supreme sword qi was far better than before. The profoundness of the supreme sword qi was far beyond Chu Fengmian's expectations. Now that Chu Fengmian had obtained the Sword Emperor crown and the Shang Sword sect's inheritance, he could finally comprehend the profoundness of the supreme sword qi. Although the supreme sword qi could only unleash its full power when 3,000 rays were gathered together, Chu Fengmian had obtained 90% of the supreme sword qi. However, Chu Fengmian now controlled 90% of the supreme sword qi. Although he was unable to unleash all of the supreme sword qi's mysteries, he was still able to use some secret techniques. This hidden sword formation was the method Chu Fengmian obtained from the Sword Emperor crown's memory. Devour. He secretly used the supreme sword qi to set up a supreme sword formation and hid it. Not to mention immortal kings, even immortal monarchs couldn't see through it. Even though Gong Yangxian was extremely cautious, he still fell into the trap. Now, he was trapped in the supreme sword formation with the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor. Kill! Seeing Gong Yangxian and the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor being enveloped in the supreme sword formation, Chu Fengmian immediately let out a long roar. The supreme sword qi condensed and turned into a sword light that was tens of thousands of feet long. It slashed down directly. The power of the supreme sword qi was completely different without the secret technique of the Shang Sword sect. Chu Fengmian could be said to have simply used the power of the supreme sword qi before, but there was no profoundness in it. It was like a warrior who didn't know any martial techniques and only knew brute force. He could only use less than 30% of his strength. But now that Chu Fengmian had comprehended various secret techniques of the Shang Sword sect, the power of the supreme sword formation was completely different. Under the sword light, Gong Yangxian suddenly took out an ancient bronze mirror and covered the top of his and the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor's head, turning into a barrier to protect them. This ancient bronze mirror was also an extremely high-quality immortal weapon. Although it wasn't as good as the sword Bone Gate, it wasn't far off. Compared to the black and white sword sect's immortal sword that Chu Fengmian had, its quality was even higher. High grade, it's at least a high-grade immortal artifact. Some warriors could not help but exclaim when they saw the power emanating from the ancient bronze mirror. Just like spirit weapons, immortal weapons had different grades. This bronze mirror was at least a high-grade immortal weapon, but it was of a higher grade than the black and white sword sect's sect guarding immortal sword. Even some of the behemoths in the extraterritorial starry sky did not have a single upper-grade immortal weapon. It was considered a treasure even in the three great sacred realms. The Tianjian sect really has a deep foundation. So many fairy weapons must have come from the Tianjiu domain. Another warrior said. The three great immortal swords of the Tianjin sect were famous throughout the world. Now, the bronze mirror that Gong Yangxian had casually taken out was a high-grade immortal artifact. Any one of these artifacts would cause countless immortal kings to fight over them. Now, the Tianjin sect had obtained all of them. When the bronze mirror was taken out, it shrouded Gong Yangxian and the scorching sun sword emperor. The light it emitted was actually able to faintly resist the sword light of the supreme sword formation. This bronze mirror could withstand the attack of a peak immortal king. Another tortoise shell. I'd like to see how many more tortoise shells you have. Chu Fengmian sneered and suddenly moved. He struck out with both swords. For a moment, two different powers erupted from the two swords. Among them, the ancestral dragon's supreme sword let out a long roar. It was the power of the 9 moves of the ancestral ancestor. The titanic godly sword in Chu Fengmian's right hand emitted a purple light. This purple light vaguely appeared to be in the shape of a crystal. The mystery of the amethyst swordsmanship. Among all the swordsmanship that Chu Fengmian obtained from the upper sword sect, the amethyst swordsmanship was the one that inspired him the most. It was also the swordsmanship that Chu Fengmian comprehended the most. Apart from the peerless swordsmanship that Chu Fengmian still couldn't comprehend, the amethyst swordsmanship could be considered the strongest swordsmanship that Chu Fengmian obtained from the upper sword sect. Chu Fengmian unleashed two completely different sword techniques. They didn't collide at all when Chu Fengmian unleashed them at the same time. Instead, they fused together and went straight for Gong Yangxian. Boom! The two swords fiercely bombarded the bronze mirror above Gong Yangshuan's head. The bronze mirror trembled continuously, and cracks appeared on the barrier formed by the power of the bronze mirror. The defense of an upper-grade immortal artifact was damaged to this extent with a single strike? Seeing this scene, many martial artists and demon deities couldn't accept it for a moment. An upper-grade immortal artifact was a supreme treasure in their eyes. It could be called the supreme treasure of a sect. But now, Chu Fengmian's simple strike had caused countless cracks to appear on the barrier formed by the bronze mirror. This person's attack is comparable to the immortal monarch realm. An old man stared at Chu Fengmian and couldn't help but say, to be able to crack the barrier formed by an upper-grade immortal artifact with a single strike, Chu Fengmian's strength was no longer in the Immortal King realm. At least in terms of attack power, Chu Fengmian had completely surpassed the Immortal King realm and was close to the Immortal Monarch realm. Immortal Monarch. This person has the strength of an Immortal Monarch realm. Countless eyes stared fixedly. They couldn't believe this sentence. A martial artist who hadn't stepped into the Celestial realm actually had the strength of an Immortal Monarch realm. If they didn't see it with their own eyes, they would only think that the person who said this sentence was a madman. But now, Chu Fengmian was right in front of them. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, he shattered the defense of the bronze mirror with a single strike. Such strength was definitely not something that an Immortal King realm could achieve. This kind of strength couldn't be described as a monstrous genius. For a moment, everyone was stunned and didn't know what to say. Condense. On the other side, Gong Yangshuan's eyes were filled with shock when he saw that the defense of the bronze mirror had been cracked with a single strike. This bronze mirror was an immortal artifact that he had obtained by chance when he was young. He naturally knew the power of this immortal artifact. Once he activated this immortal artifact with all his strength. Even if there were 2 or 3 martial artists and demon deities of the same realm, they wouldn't be able to break the defense of this immortal artifact. Gong Yangshuan's current strength could be said to be at the peak of the Immortal King realm, the strongest expert below the Immortal Monarch realm. It could be said that there were 3 or 4 peak Immortal King realm experts besieging him. He could calmly face them by activating this immortal artifact. But in front of him, Chu Fengmian's sword had shattered this immortal artifact. Chapter 2294. Die. Chu Fengmian roared and rushed towards Gong Yangxian. Boom! The sword in Chu Fengmian's hand suddenly burst out with dazzling light. At this moment, the world changed drastically. The yin-yang array diagram appeared above Chu Fengmian's head and integrated into his sword. Reversal of yin and yang. The strongest sword of the yin-yang sword codex. As Chu Fengmian approached Gong Yangxian, he suddenly struck out with his sword. Two sword lights, one black and one white, were clearly separated, but complemented each other. Where did this person obtain so many profound swordsmanship? Many martial artists and demon deities murmured in disbelief as they watched Chu Fengmian strike again. The sword techniques that Chu Fengmian displayed now were different, but each of them was incomparably profound. It could even be said that they had never seen such a powerful sword technique. The yin-yang Dao contained in this sword technique was endless. Many martial artists and demon deities who majored in the yin-yang Dao couldn't see through it clearly. Chu Fengmian's sword slashed down. The yin-yang Dao and Chu Fengmian's sword technique merged into one, turning into a shocking sword light that slashed down. In terms of power, it wasn't any weaker than the previous two strikes. Yun Luo. At the moment when the sword slashed down, Gong Yangxian put away the ancient bronze mirror. The ancient bronze mirror's power was almost depleted, so it couldn't bear the sharpness of the sword. However, as soon as Gong Yangxian put away the bronze mirror, another parasol appeared in his hand. The parasol opened up and floated above his head. For a moment, it seemed as if the area it covered had become a separate space. The moment Chu Fengmian's sword slashed down, a ray of light was emitted from the umbrella, colliding with the power of the sword. Another upper-grade immortal tool? Many martial artists were shocked when they saw the umbrella appear. Gong Yangxian actually took out another immortal tool. In terms of energy fluctuation, the power of the umbrella was definitely not inferior to the ancient bronze mirror. This was a upper-grade immortal tool. Even many colossal sects in the extraterritorial starry sky would find it difficult to take out a high-grade immortal weapon. A high-grade immortal weapon was definitely enough to be a sect's immortal weapon. But now, Gong Yangxian actually took out another high-grade immortal artifact. This is the foundation of the Tianjian sect. An old man couldn't help but ask. The Tianjian sect is indeed a sect that has dominated the 9 regions for 10,000 years. Another one? Even Chu Fengmian was surprised when he saw the umbrella. How could Gong Yangxian have so many upper-grade immortal artifacts? At the same time, Chu Fengmian also noticed that the energy on this umbrella seemed to be incomparably similar to the energy on the ancient bronze mirror. This energy gave Chu Fengmian a faint feeling of familiarity. Just what kind of immortal artifact is this? Whether it was the umbrella or the bronze mirror, judging from their appearance, they were immortal weapons from the ancient times. They might even be immortal weapons from the Middle Ages or the Primeval Age. Chu Fengmian didn't recognize the origin of these two immortal artifacts. However, Chu Fengmian actually felt a sense of familiarity from the two immortal artifacts. Faintly, Chu Fengmian felt that if he were to obtain the two immortal artifacts, they would be of great use to him. So what if you have so many immortal artifacts? Break for me. Thinking of this, Chu Fengmian no longer hesitated. Sword intent emerged from the two swords. Suddenly, the swords flashed again, and countless sword techniques slashed down. The swords slashed down like a torrential downpour, slashing at the umbrella. 8 sects rain sword technique. As the swords slashed down, the light on the umbrella began to dim. Even this upper-grade immortal artifact couldn't withstand Chu Fengmian's continuous attack. Even the space condensed by the umbrella began to crack. Humph! Seeing that the umbrella was about to collapse, Gong Yangxian snorted coldly. Another flag appeared in his hand. It was woven with feathers and looked incomparably noble. It was a Luan flag. As Gong Yangxian injected a stream of energy into it, the Luan flag suddenly soared into the sky. It emitted an ancient energy and suppressed Chu Fengmian. Another upper-grade immortal artifact. The power of the Luan flag was incomparably similar to the power of the umbrella and the bronze mirror. These three immortal artifacts seem to be a group of immortal artifacts. There's more. Chu Fengmian's eyes were somewhat cold. He didn't expect that it would take so much time to deal with Gong Yangxian. This Gong Yangxian indeed had too many immortal artifacts in his hands. However, the moment the Luan flag appeared, Chu Fengmian actually felt a great attraction, as if he wanted to obtain these three immortal artifacts very much. Other immortal artifacts, even those that were close to the level of extreme immortal artifacts, had never made Chu Fengmian feel this way. However, these three immortal artifacts were incomparably attractive to Chu Fengmian. This attraction seemed to come from Chu Fengmian's body. These three immortal artifacts definitely have an extraordinary origin. The killing intent in Chu Fengmian's eyes intensified. Even if it was for these three immortal artifacts, Chu Fengmian would not let Gong Yangxian go today. Die! Chu Fengmian took a step forward. Facing the suppression of the Luan flag, he was not afraid at all. From behind Chu Fengmian, three huge shadows rose up. Primogenitor Tianlong, heaven-devouring beast, and Xianjing. The power of the three great innate divine beasts completely erupted at this moment. The heaven-devouring beast's shadow was the first to shine. Heaven-devouring secret technique. With a thought, Chu Fengmian suddenly activated the heaven-devouring secret technique. It turned into a huge vortex and shrouded in front of Chu Fengmian. The suppression that erupted from the Luan flag was completely devoured by this huge vortex. The heaven-devouring secret technique contained the power to devour heaven and earth. This little suppression was nothing in the face of the heaven-devouring secret technique. Almost at the same time, Chu Fengmian's sword moved. The shadows of primogenitor Tianlong and Xianjing, the two great innate divine beasts, shone brightly. Their power erupted and condensed on Chu Fengmian's sword. Dragon whale shattering the sea. Chu Fengmian had created a fist art with the power of the two great innate divine beasts. Now that he had integrated it into his sword art, the power of this move was even greater when he struck it with the sword. With Chu Fengmian's current understanding of the sword Dao, he could integrate fist techniques, blade techniques, spear techniques, and halberd techniques into his swordsmanship. When he struck with the sword, the peak of the martial Dao was extremely similar. It was just that the stance displayed was different. Chapter 2295. Chu Fengmian's sword Dao had already reached this level. This was also the most powerful aspect of Chu Fengmian's Sword Dao Ancient Book. It wasn't just the integration of swordsmanship. Even the 9 profound immortal techniques and the 9 forms of the primogenitor were not swordsmanship, but they were all integrated into Chu Fengmian's Sword Dao Ancient Book and turned into Chu Fengmian's power. Chu Fengmian's Dragon Whale Sea-Splitting Fist was originally created with a little bit of the Dragon Whale's bloodline. However, now that Chu Fengmian had obtained the origin energy of the primogenitor Tianlong and the Black Whale, he could be considered the ancestor of the Dragon Whale. The Dragon Whale Sea-Splitting Fist had become the most suitable move for Chu Fengmian. With the support of the bloodline power, the power of this move was not inferior to an immortal emperor's immortal technique. In fact, as Chu Fengmian grew stronger and stronger, his bloodline power grew stronger and stronger, and the power of this move also grew stronger. Rumble! The sword contained the immense power of the 2 connate godbeasts, and the Luan flag couldn't withstand it at all. The flag was sent flying with a boom. Come back! Seeing that, Gong Yangxian immediately activated the Luan flag. He wanted to retrieve the Luan flag like before. However, Chu Fengmian would not let the Luan flag do as he wished. His body was even faster than Gong Yangxian's. In an instant, he had reached the side of the Luan flag and suddenly grabbed the pole of the Luan flag. Boom! The Luan flag emitted rays of light to resist Chu Fengmian's palm. The Luan flag had already been refined by Gong Yangxian, so it was naturally not under Chu Fengmian's control. However, at this moment, a strange power condensed in Chu Fengmian's palm. This strange power suppressed the Luan flag, which was originally resisting fiercely, but the moment it was suppressed by this power, it weakened a lot. The ancient emperor's art of war. This move was one of Chu Fengmian's greatest gains from his trip to the Shanghai starfield. The ancient emperor's art of war could directly seize an immortal weapon regardless of the imprint on it. Even though the Luan flag had already recognized Gong Yangxian as its master, it could not resist the ancient emperor's art of war. The ancient emperor's art of war was a secret technique created to deal with immortal weapons. As long as the user's strength was strong enough, even an extreme immortal weapon could not resist the ancient emperor's art of war. Moreover, the Luan flag's power was of extreme immortal weapon level. What's going on? Gong Yangxian instantly felt that he couldn't take back the Luan flag. He Fengmian's art of the flag was seal as seal, was immortal seal of his will of war of war. Of Fengmiwar's fist is of war was wills of its own. Its of Faf will ss is, of the immortal sealed. S. The ancient art. Suddenly, Gong Yangxian glanced at Chu Fengmian. He seemed to have thought of an ancient secret art that could seize immortal weapons. Gong Yangxuan's expression changed drastically. He could no longer care about protecting the scorching sun sword emperor. He broke the supreme sword formation and rushed towards Chu Fengmian. He had found these high-grade immortal artifacts in a ruin in the past, and they contained great secret. If any one of them fell into the hands of others, it would be no different from a calamity to him. Thus, Gong Yangxian had never used those immortal items for fear that an accident would occur. This time, in order to protect the scorching sun sword emperor, he had no choice but to use them. He did not expect Chu Fengmian to know the ancient emperor's art of war and wanted to seize the Luan flag. He could no longer care about protecting the scorching sun sword emperor as he rushed towards Chu Fengmian. The moment Gong Yangxian left the supreme sword array, a blood-curdling shriek rang out. The scorching sun sword emperor had been severely injured in the battle with Chu Fengmian. He was barely able to resist the supreme sword formation under the protection of Gong Yangxian. But now that Gong Yangxian had left, the scorching sun sword emperor was still in the formation. He was like a lamb in a tiger's den. Under the sword light, the scorching sun sword emperor could not resist at all and was killed by the supreme sword formation. The scorching sun sword emperor's blood essence had entered Chu Fengmian's body through the heaven-devouring power left behind by Chu Fengmian in the supreme sword array. Flying immortal sword shadow. Upon hearing the scorching sun sword emperor's shriek, Gong Yangxian also knew what had happened in the supreme sword array. However, he couldn't care less now. He definitely couldn't let Chu Fengmian take the Luan flag away. Gong Yangxuan's sword edge suddenly slashed towards Chu Fengmian. In a breath's time, Gong Yangxuan's body suddenly changed and turned into a sword edge, turning the body into a sword. This was almost another type of great achievement in Sword Dao. Turning the body into a sword, the sword edge was oneself. Using one's own body to display sword techniques was even more powerful than using a spiritual sword. In an instant, hundreds of sword techniques slashed towards Chu Fengmian. Each of these sword techniques contained incomparably terrifying power. In ancient times, many Sword Dao geniuses pursued this step of turning the body into a sword. This was a higher level than becoming one with the sword. Using oneself as the sword edge. Gong Yangxian has actually reached this step. How long has it been? Gong Yangxian hasn't used his full strength. Previously, he was still conserving his strength. It seems like he has no choice but to take action because of the Luan flag. What kind of treasure is that Luan flag? Why did Gong Yongxian not hesitate to break the plan and use all his strength to stop it? Many martial artists and demon deities also noticed that Gong Yongxian had been stalling for time. Not only him, but all the actions of the entire Tianjian sect, including the formation, were all stalling for time. They were stalling for time to maintain the ancient desolation White Wolf incarnation. As long as they could hold on for half an hour, once the ancient desolation White Wolf incarnation disappeared, Chu Fengmian and Alcade Star Emperor would have lost a great help. At that time, it would be the time for the real counterattack. Gong Yongxian had been in the Supreme Sword formation all this time. Firstly, it was to protect the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor. Secondly, it was to stall for time. Therefore, he had been using his immortal weapon to defend himself and did not take the initiative to attack. But now, Gong Yongxian had broken the plan and used all his strength to attack. Obviously, the Luan flag was extremely important to Gong Yongxian. Although the Luan flag was an upper-grade immortal weapon and was priceless, Gong Yongxuan's status was not worth risking his life for an upper-grade immortal weapon. The only possibility was that the Luan flag was not as simple as an upper-grade immortal weapon. It must be hiding a great secret that made Gong Yongxian so crazy. Chapter 2296. You don't even care about the Scorching Sun sword? Chu Fengmian was a little surprised to see Gong Yongxian give up on the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor and fight for the Luan flag. Although the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor was nearing the end of his lifespan, he still had at least 1,000 years left. The Scorching Sun Sword Emperor was a pinnacle immortal king expert. It could be said that he was a pinnacle expert in the entire 9 regions. Even if he only had 1,000 years of lifespan, he was still worth being roped in by various forces. However, Gong Yongxian had rushed out of the Supreme Sword Array to stop Chu Fengmian from taking the Luan flag. In Gong Yongxuan's heart, the Luan flag was more important than the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor. Chu Fengmian knew Gong Yongxuan's character very well. He was very good at calculating gains and losses. Since he was willing to give up on the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor, it must be because the Luan flag was definitely more important than the Scorching Sun Sword Emperor. What exactly is the origin of this Luan flag? Chu Fengmian couldn't tell the origin of the Luan flag. However, because of the guidance in Chu Fengmian's bloodline, he was prepared to snatch the Luan flag and study it carefully. However, Gong Yongxian was actually going all out to fight for the Luan flag. This made Chu Fengmian even more curious about the origin of the Luan flag. The more important the Luan flag was to Gong Yongxian, the more Chu Fengmian wouldn't give it to Gong Yongxian. Get lost! Chu Fengmian shouted coldly and moved his left hand. In an instant, several sword lights were aimed at Gong Yongxian. Every sword light contained an extremely mysterious sword technique. Now that Chu Fengmian had obtained thousands of sword techniques from the Upper Sword Sect's library, it could be said that no one in the entire 9 regions or the entire extraterritorial starry sky knew more sword techniques than Chu Fengmian. None of the sword techniques that could be listed in the Upper Sword Sect's library were ordinary. They were at least at the immortal technique level. When they were displayed with Chu Fengmian's understanding of the sword Dao, every sword technique had some shadows of the 9 regions' sword technique. These swordsmanship had been integrated into the 9 regions' swordsmanship by Chu Fengmian and had been changed by Chu Fengmian's sword principle. In terms of power, it was much stronger than before. Gong Yongxuan's face was grim in the face of these sword techniques. He turned into a sword and struck out several sword lights in succession, colliding with these sword techniques. At this moment, at the same time, Chu Fengmian Art of War. The power of the ancient emperor's art of seizing war shrouded the Luan flag in an instant. The mark that belonged to Gong Yongxian was completely suppressed by the power of the ancient emperor's art of seizing war. Calm. Is The moment Chu Fengmian activated the ancient emperor's art of war and completely suppressed Gong Yangshuan's mark on the banner, Gong Yangxian also sensed this. The sword that he had transformed into contained boundless killing intent. Suddenly, it erupted. Boom! The aura of this sword tip suddenly changed. The surrounding space was affected by this force, and it seemed to have turned into a sword domain. The sword will that filled the sky came crashing down. Instantly, it turned into streaks of sword shadows that came slashing down. Gong Yangxian was someone who had lived for tens of thousands of years. His understanding of the sword Tao was unfathomable. No one knew how many profound and mysterious sword techniques he had comprehended. His swordsmanship was fully displayed at this moment. Sword Master Heaven and Earth. Gong Yangxian, who had transformed into a sword, seemed to have become the only master among the countless sword lights. His every move was enough to affect the general trend of the world. Under his guidance, the streaks of sword light slashed towards Chu Fengmian, crushing the surrounding space. The boundless and violent power swept towards Chu Fengmian. Before the sword lights arrived, the space around Chu Fengmian began to shatter. The space around Chu Fengmian couldn't bear such a terrifying force. Divine Tree! Chu Fengmian roared when he saw this. A towering divine tree suddenly appeared behind him. The divine tree took root between heaven and earth. With the appearance of the divine tree, the surrounding space suddenly became incomparably solid. The boundless violent force was weakened by a lot in front of the divine tree. It couldn't shake Chu Fengmian at all. Ever since Chu Fengmian integrated the divine tree, it was bound to Chu Fengmian. The stronger the divine tree, the stronger Chu Fengmian's power. Now that Chu Fengmian's strength had improved by leaps and bounds, the power of the divine tree was also different from before. The divine tree appeared and its branches and leaves spread out. Ancient inscriptions appeared on the leaves of the divine tree. These ancient inscriptions weren't inscribed on the leaves, but were born innately. As the divine tree grew stronger, they gradually emerged. Chu Fengmian knew that this was the law of the divine tree. It belonged to the ancestor of all divine trees, the power of the builder tree. Now, the divine tree on Chu Fengmian's body was constantly transforming as Chu Fengmian's strength grew stronger. It had already begun to show some of the characteristics of the builder tree. All the leaves on the divine tree flickered. For a moment, the leaves emitted a seven-colored radiance that shrouded Chu Fengmian's head. No matter how many sword techniques Gong Yangxian unleashed, they all turned into nothingness and dissipated the moment they approached the seven-colored radiance. With the divine tree blocking all of Gong Yangshuan's attacks, Chu Fengmian no longer had any worries. He grabbed the Luan flag and suddenly channeled the devouring power into it. The ancient emperor's art of war could only suppress the mark left by Gong Yangxian in the Luan flag. However, the mark had already been left in the Luan flag for thousands of years. It had already become one with the Luan flag. It would be difficult to remove it without a few years. However, this was only for ordinary people. For Chu Fengmian, it was extremely easy for him to do all this. Boom! The devouring secret technique was channeled into the Luan flag. It immediately turned into a devouring divine python and drilled into the deepest part of the Luan flag to search for the mark in the deepest part. Facing the mark left by Gong Yangxian, the devouring divine python opened its mouth and devoured it. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.